Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is your boy, Nathan Crankfield, the host of the Seeking Excellence podcast, and it is great to be with you today. Thank you for listening to this episode. Last week, we really started a profound conversation, a widespread conversation about the cost of living, this rising cost of living. And if you've been following for a while, you know that I've wanted to do a series on these three different kind of massive issues, massive things that I think so many young Catholic, young Christian families are ignoring. And I think they're ignoring it at their peril. The first one that we did was this episode that I released on AI recently with Jacob Ciccarelli from Truthly.ai, the co-founder of Truthly. The second one I did was last week on this rising cost of living. I think so many people are underestimating this. We did a deep dive into the numbers of what life costs now, but also what I projected out 15 years from now, what costs will be. We saw that if you were raised, 20 years ago, if you were 10 years old, 15 years old, and you thought that making $100,000 a year was going to be the end all be all, that you've made it in life, you see through inflation that $100,000 per year in 2005, in 2025 is over $160,000 per year. So seeing how that number has raised since then, and then thinking about when we're 40, 50 in kind of our prime earning years, 100K is just way too low of a target. I talked about the cost of the rising costs of home prices, of renting, all of that, and tied it in with the cost of education. Many of us went to private Catholic schools. We're just kind of raised with that being accessible to so many different families. And the reality is that it's going to be a lot more challenging for our generation, and the years to come, and even our children's generation is going to be even more profound and just skyrocketed. So thinking about all of that, one of the biggest claims to hedge against inflation, to fight against this, to protect your wealth, to have a deflationary asset, something that actually gives you more purchasing power over time. The claim for that, the number one asset that makes the claim to be the solution to this problem is Bitcoin. And one thing that I have, my strongest take when it comes to Bitcoin is that I don't personally care whether you want to buy Bitcoin or you don't. What I care about and think is the only foolish decision you can make, or at least the most foolish decision that you can make, is to just absolutely ignore it. Is to say, oh, it's too complex, or I don't understand it. To not spend an hour to 3 hours, 5 hours of your time throughout 2025 to learn about what this is and decide for yourself, make an informed decision on whether or not you think it's BS and you think it's a scam, if that's what you believe, or to decide, I think this is valuable and I think we should start including it in our investment portfolio and start to accumulate some Bitcoin over this next year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever it might be for you in your financial plan. And so today's guest is Wyatt O'Rourke, who's a good friend of mine here in Denver, Colorado. He's a part of my men's group that I talk about often, that I love, that is filled with just excellent, excellent men. He's a supporter of the podcast, so I'll always give a shout to the local supporters, which I appreciate and love his support and encouragement and endorsement of the podcast and just how much Seeking Excellence has meant to him. He shares a little bit of that in the episode. But just really want to encourage you. He's the founder of Basilic Financial, and you can work with Wyatt on how to create a financial plan, whether you're more into traditional finance or you want to start to incorporate Bitcoin. He has great solutions for financial planning. And so just want to encourage you to check that out. If you're moved and inspired by some of the things he shares today, as a fellow practicing Catholic who's very deep into the Bitcoin space, he's able to help you with that. But I also just want to encourage you to check out the resources. Listen to today's episode. If you join us on Locals for free, seekingexcellence.locals.com, you can become a free member and you'll see my whole list of sources there and things that we used to come up with this, the things that we recommend and refer, and how I've come to learn more about Bitcoin. And I also will be offering for the rest of the next month and a half-ish to the end of March, anybody who becomes an annual supporter will receive a full free hour of a coaching session with me. And so I've been running the Excellent Life program now for 2 months and doing some coaching there and have really, really enjoyed it. We can focus on any of the 7 pillars you want to talk about. So whether that's relational, spiritual life, fitness, you name it, we can go through any of the pillars, kind of talking about your personal financial situation, crafting a career, kind of trajectory for you, whatever it might be that you want to work through or work in. I'd be happy to do that. So anybody that signs up as an annual supporter, that's $100, or you can join as a monthly supporter for as little as $10 per month. You'd be supporting us as we're about to welcome in our second child next month, or maybe even this week. Who knows? It could happen pretty much any minute now. So we're excited to have our second child. And so if you find value out of this, I ask you to subscribe to the YouTube channel and to become a member on Locals. without further ado, let's get to today's episode with Wyatt. Mr. O'Rourke, it's so good to have you. You know, I always think it's most fun to have people who have listened to, you know, their fair number of Seeking Excellence podcasts to be on the podcast. So it's great to have you with me today, man.
Well, Nathan, the honor is really mine. It's a long-time listener, first-time caller. It's great to be here.
I love it. You're a great example of local supporters making it, you know, to the big stage. A great ambassador for the supporters and listeners. But yeah, it's great to have you. Great to have you today. So we go back. Somebody was just asking me, you know, we had a YCP event the other night here in Denver, and Wyatt was the presenter on this topic that we're going to be getting into today, Bitcoin and Catholicism. And we're going to get to that eventually. But I want to start with a little bit of an introduction to your story. But it was funny the other night, a lot of people asking me, like more people than I thought were asking me like, oh, how do you know Wyatt? You know? And it's one of those situations where, and I don't know this or not because I don't know how close you were to the other people, but like, I was like, I'm closer to him than you are, you know? We're kind of like, oh, like shocked, like, oh, you know Wyatt? Like, how do you know Wyatt? I'm like, Wyatt and I are good friends. Like, what are you talking about? How do I know Wyatt? But it was really funny. But you did a great job. How'd you feel like things went at YCP?
Yeah, no, I was pumped.
First Catholic audience for you, right?
Correct.
Speaking wise, yeah.
Correct, yeah. I've spoken to mainly Bitcoin audiences previously, so to be able to combine those two things I'm very passionate about was an honor, and I'm super grateful for YCP to have me and to host them at the space, which was also incredible. Definitely more people than I was expecting.
It was pretty full, yeah.
Yeah, and we had some religious in the crowd too.
Yeah.
So that was
Priest,
awesome.
we had a religious sister. It was awesome.
Yeah, and it was nice hearing feedback from them because I was like, once I saw them walk in the door, I was like a little intimidated because it was like, better not drop the ball on this.
Especially get into some theology and stuff.
Exactly, which I'm definitely lighter on that than the Bitcoin side. So it's like, hopefully I got my facts straight.
That's awesome, man. I love it. Well, I'd like to go back to kind of your faith journey, especially. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up, kind of what your faith was like growing up, and kind of what was the steps or the moments where you started to really go deeper into your spiritual life.
Yeah, totally. No, it's weird. I haven't quite found the most accurate way to articulate it, I think, because I'm from Madison, Wisconsin, Midwest boy, born and raised. I went to Catholic school, you know?
Yeah.
And I think, unfortunately, like many people who went to Catholic school, I think specifically in the Midwest, it was and I only knew this, you know, now that I dove more into the faith, it was like a very lukewarm faith formation, you know. I think they really prided themselves on having good education, which was great, but you know, religion was just like a class during the day. I've been trying to think back on that experience. I was like, why was it like that? Or it's like, was I just really not paying attention like the whole time? I went there, you know, kindergarten through 8th grade, so hopefully it wasn't, you know, 9+ years of not paying attention, but it was just like, I see, you know, everything going on at Lourdes now, and it's just like, man, I did not have this type of experience in my, you know, Catholic education as a youth. So honestly, when I started getting more involved in the faith, I started getting a little jaded about it. It was like, how could this be happening? You know, how could I go to a Catholic school and know so little about the faith actually? And it was tough to, you know, my parents are divorced. You know, my mom and stepdad are, you know, kind of openly, you know, atheists. My dad and stepmom, not really faithful, you know, and is like the terms of like spiritual people. And so, you know, we were getting no faith formation at home. So, you know, really kind of came upon, you know, the school and like my grandparents. And I think my grandfather, you know, was a great man, and, you know, type of guy who never missed mass, but he's also kind of a product of, you know, growing up in the Catholic Church of America when it's arguably was its weakest. So I think, you know, he had like this obligation of, you know, you go to church on Sunday, but, you know, still not like, you know, we didn't have the faith like integrated into our, you know, our lives, and I spent a lot of time with them. So it's just interesting now, knowing what I do, like reflecting back on those times and thinking of the faith formation, and, you know, got confirmed and, you know, received all the sacraments. But then once I got into high school and college, just really fell away from the faith hard and started living a very secular life. And I always found comfort in logic, and if the more I could like reason my way through things, like the more comfortable I felt. And I frequently, and ashamed of this, at what I was how I was convincing myself of not embracing the faith at the time, but I was consistently putting my own like mental arguments like in opposition of the church.
Mm.
And I think that I was pushing myself further and further away, and I didn't think this was something I need. Honestly, almost the fact of like hocus pocus. But fortunately, my wife was not that way and was always, much more convicted in her faith. And, I just tell her mom constantly, almost every time I see her, she raised 4 very faithful daughters in the faith. One of them was a focused missionary and works for St. Paul's in Madison, Wisconsin now, which was fun, just having that connection with her, like where, I grew up. It was just, fantastic to see. And so it was actually, really marriage prep that brought me back into the faith, which I'm extremely grateful for. And Erica, Macy's younger sister, had done an internship out here in Denver for Focus before we lived out here. My first job was in Kansas City after school. That's where we were living. And when we moved out here, Macy asked her, it's like, well, where should we start going to church? And Erica recommended the Lord's. And so, and that's hence the journey, began. It was like really honestly kind of happened under my nose. And again, like some of the things I'm, ashamed of. Macy started, going to, church by herself. I was like, oh, I'm too busy. I'm working on, Sunday.
And this is during marriage prep?
No, it was kind of like prior.
Okay.
Yeah. Prior to marriage prep. But, and then she started going to, OCIA, by herself.
Then RCIA.
But, yes, then RCIA.
Yeah.
And it was kind of crazy just seeing the way she came back from that, like lit up, it's like really on fire. And it's like, couldn't wait to tell me what she learned. And like you mentioned earlier, we'll kind of get to this, but that's how I felt like coming back from Bitcoin meetups and, just being able to talk about something, greater than everyday life, or like that memes like, hey bro, you catch the game last night. It's like we're really seeking out kind of more intentional interactions and communities with people. And I was like, okay, this is how I feel, when I go to Bitcoin meetups and come back, and I just want to tell her everything I learned and like cool people I talked with. And so kind of dipped my toe. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Dipped my toe and like started, go to the occasional RCA class. But I would sit in the back and like cross my arms and be like, listen to Father Brian in front is like, no, I don't think that's right. Or it's like, I have beef with that, or it's like a bone to pick. And so I was really stubborn at first. And, even marriage prep.
At that point, would you have considered yourself agnostic, or what would you kind of really have said that you were?
Yeah, probably pretty close to that, honestly. Okay. Like I never like fully like proclaimed to anybody I was like agnostic, but it's just like, I'm actually like not very interested in this. Yeah. Just more in general.
Sure. Dang. And so do you remember specific things, or was there a specific moment in attending RCIA that maybe like a question was answered, or a specific topic that kind of started to open, the door?
Yeah. Well, and it's so funny looking back on it now. At the end of one of the classes, I wrote, they hand out like note cards for like questions. I wrote like literally the whole thing front and back, like going off about like the bureaucracy of the church. And it's just like framing like the smart ass question.
The libertarian.
Yeah. And then I even go to the next class to like hear it answered, so it was just like, that point specifically sticks out in my mind. It was like how stubborn, I was. And I give Macy so much credit for just giving me the grace to like grow into this like myself. And something we feel continuously blessed in is that while she, didn't fall, as hard away from the faith, we both succumbed to, a secular lifestyle to, some extent, but, we really kind of came in, together, and she gave me just, like I said, a ton of grace to, find this out for myself. And, we bounce ideas off each other, but she really inspired me to, take it seriously. And even when we started marriage prep, I was like, okay, this is like a box I have to check, we'll move on with our lives. But fortunately, and I have so much respect for the church and structuring it this way, and now I'm kind of like a marriage prep advocate, where it's like, okay, you have 9 months of like doing something serious. And now I tell, people who are, considering getting married in the church, or, who are just interested in Catholicism or have like a secular marriage to, ask about it. It's like, well, we're receiving a sacrament, and that's important to us because we place importance on it. This isn't just like some 10-minute ceremony and let's get to the party. It's like we have such tremendous respect for what this all entails. We're man and woman, become one. And I give you a huge credit too, because I think one of the things that helped me turn the page the most is just kind of understanding like my role as a man, husband, and aspiring father, and what kind of blueprint the church actually provides for men and women to live out a faithful life. And that took me a little bit to get to, but once I saw it, it's kind of like Bitcoin. It's like, oh, you can't like unsee it.
That's a good comp there.
Yeah.
For sure. No, that totally makes sense. I think that's been my hope, and you've been a good example of my theory, if you will, on how so many men, dude, like they just need to see, oh, there's a place for me here.
Yeah.
There's actually a role and specific things that I'm called to do and ways that I'm called to lead, in a place for my masculinity to really flourish and not just kind of vaguely exist, but really mean something. And yeah, you feel more of like a puzzle piece being put in the right place rather than just kind of wandering out there and floating out there in the world. It's really powerful. And that's something I've been trying to encourage with this, uprising of masculinity, and just re-emphasizing a lot of these traditional beliefs and the traditional value of masculinity and the headship of a husband and all that stuff, is that the world is continuously removing the importance or the necessity of men, or at least trying to. And that's eroded a lot in society. And I think it's been, part of the erosion of gender. It's been part of the erosion of marriage and all of those things. But when we can start to restore, I think it's interesting to me how often we try to, as a church, to treat the symptom while not treating the like root cause. And to me, this is a root cause aspect of it, is really bringing back masculinity and not just saying, well, how do we lower the divorce rate? Well, two of the things that I think are really important that we're going to get into today are, one, how about we actually teach men to be men and women to be women? And that doesn't have to be as restricting and limiting as that sounds to the modern ear. As soon as you hear that, it almost is just like, no, that's bad. But that is like the idea or the reaction to think that that's bad, to me, is very modernist. Totally. And it's just modernism has crept into your heart, into your mind, and you don't understand what I'm actually saying there. But to say that men should be men and women should be women, that should not be controversial. It should not be jolting. It should not be upsetting, but it is to so many people. The second thing is I always try to tell people, or if people ask me, what do you think about marriage prep? How would you change it? It's, well, we can analyze, we have data on the things that are causing divorce. And one of the things that's the major causes in divorce is finances. And so why does the Catholic Church have nothing? I'm like, there's some Catholic stuff out there. There's like the Catholic Money Show now, Ave Maria funds and some different things out there that are kind of entering the space, Basilica Financial. But there is still this kind of big gap, I think, compared to a lot of Protestant churches who will go through the Ramsey program together. And there's some Catholic churches that do that. And I'm not, the biggest advocate for Ramsey, but I'm saying at least you teach people how to budget.
Yeah.
I'm going to prevent you from just one or the other spouse just totally unraveling and just destroying your marriage. This kind of like light touching on of, you guys should probably joint bank accounts and stuff. It's like we should have a pretty solidified plan, an idea, or at least be showing you different things in marriage prep for how you live your finances. But we don't do that. We don't kind of have this approach to saying, we know that these are kind of the major causes of divorce. Why don't we teach you specifically, like, this is how healthy conflict resolution can happen. Oh, this is how you just manage your budget and you create a plan for your financial life together. Oh, this is what a man's role is. This is what the woman's role is. You guys can share a lot of this stuff, but there's still some core things that are going to work best if the man plays the man and the woman plays the woman.
Right. It is funny because, it's like the blue-haired baristas freaking out hearing that. But, to us, it just sounds like it's so obvious,
right.
in hindsight. And you're totally right, because I'm pretty confident saying it's like I wouldn't be like literally here today in like every aspect of what that means if I didn't hear that masculine message of like what my role is in the church. And so I'm extremely grateful for you for propagating that. That's why I've been such a fan and supporter of your mission, because it's important. I'm just like, I don't think it's a trope or an underestimation, you say. It's like masculinity is under attack. That's how most civilizations, crumble. Is it takes strong, courageous men to just say no or stand up in opposition,
Yeah,
or
we're
at
not doing
least,
this anymore.
lead from the front. And it was just like, this is how things should be. And another thing that too that just clicked for me after I stopped being so stubborn and just like opened my mind and heart a little bit, where it's like, this has actually kind of worked for 2,000 years. Like, why do I think I'm like smart enough to outsmart that?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Or it's like, oh, actually, we don't need to recreate the wheel here.
Yeah.
It's like, it's actually laid out in front of you. You
Yes.
just have to actually like embrace it.
Yeah, it was a big thing. So we gave a talk, and I want to do a podcast on this, excuse me, with Emily soon. We gave a talk recently at a youth group, and this was what they asked us to speak about, was kind of shamar and submissio, which is, shamar is to protect. It's the word that Adam is kind of given in the Garden of Eden. And then submission, which, is really pulled mostly from Ephesians 5. And I've done extensive work on this. I'm sure you've heard a lot of it, but talking about this, it's kind of interesting as we were preparing and planning for it, how even in the church, like, I love the fact that there's the feminine genius, right? There's books written on it. Lisa Cotter, who's a parishioner at Lourdes and a great Catholic speaker, she's written an amazing book on it, extrapolating a lot of stuff from the work of St. John Paul II, who talked extensively about it. It's talking about kind of 4 main feminine virtues in his letter to women was really what Emily was drawing on in her talk. So things like receptivity, maternity, sensitivity, and generosity. Love all that, but it's kind of like, okay, well, what's like the masculine genius? And it's almost a joke to say that, right? That this concept of what are men exceptionally good at, especially compared to women. You almost can't say anything anymore in today's world. It to say that a man is better at X, Y, or Z is almost always controversial, right? You can get on Twitter and you see, people think that Caitlin Clark could beat, I'm trying to think of somebody, Anthony Edwards. I think that was one that I've seen. Anthony Edwards versus certain female basketball players in one-on-one, like, who would win? It's like Anthony Edwards would beat every woman in the world 100-0, right? Anthony Edwards would beat me 100-0, but he would also beat every woman in the world 100-0. And that's okay. But you can't, like, it's like, no, you can't say that. Well, men are better at fighting wars, going to war. It's like, women can go to war, women can do this. It's like, okay, we keep pulling it away. And now you're seeing kind of the kind of apex of this confusion of breaking down the wall between the genders completely, not just having like kind of a gate that has access to both sides, where it's like you can still kind of do the other things, where I can still change a diaper and Emily can still mow the lawn, but now actually saying like, oh no, there's just total blurred lines and there's no separation, to where now you see like men getting pregnant and chest feeding and all these different kinds of things that I think really flow from this. And you see it in such an interesting way in the church, where you probably saw this a lot growing up too, I would guess, based on just your experience of not really feeling like the masculine role in the church or seeing the need for it. Is I often point to this, where I say, when I was growing up, you go to a northeastern parish, you go to the Diocese of Harrisburg, where I'm from, a typical Sunday, you will see a priest and you will see female cantors, you will see female altar servers, you will see female lectors, female Eucharistic ministers, and it's essentially a priest and 15 women that run Mass. Where traditionally, back when men and women were going to Mass at even rates, it was men that ran the Mass. It was priests, male altar servers, and even in the early days, like male lectors. That was just the way the things were run. And you still see in like Eastern liturgies, women aren't even allowed in the sanctuary. Like, if you go to a Byzantine Catholic Mass, women aren't even allowed back in the sanctuary, like, where the consecration takes place. Like, it has to be a layman cleans the sanctuary, which is really interesting. But what do you see in those types of environments? You see pretty much a 50-50 split between men and women attending Mass. And it's just one of the kind of natural things that we see all the time, where if women are doing something, and then almost only women will do it, right? If it seems like it's exclusively women, then it just kind of totally disinterests men. Where if men are kind of leading something, typically both genders will still participate and partake, which is a really interesting thing. But love to hear that you found the role. Now, another thing that's been kind of helpful in that is our men's group, which is where I think we've gotten even closer over the last like 6 or 7 months. Do you want to tell them a little bit about what we call the salesman, and how, any role that's played in your spiritual journey as well?
No, totally. I would love to. I'm honored to be a part of it. And just to bridge like your prior point, where it's like, I learned this from you, when you were reading the Screw Tape Letters a year or two ago, and it's like the devil is, extremely clever, and it's like deception is one of his, most useful tricks, right? I think that's like no more apparent than like this gender conversation that's like people obsess about in our modern, secular culture. And so it's like, oh, ignore like the natural, hormones and chemicals like flowing through your body,
Right.
like suppress those. It's like, oh, those don't actually exist. It's like you, this worship of self, which is dumb. And, we should call it, what it is. And it's evil. And I think the church really does, need to not only understand like the current moment, but then also have like a game plan to counteract it. And this is, I was listening to a great podcast. I can't remember which one, but they were talking about how young men have been drawing to Islam because on the outside, it looks very masculine because it's ordered and disciplined. Well, the Catholic Church is actually very ordered and disciplined if you allow it to be.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where, as a layman, I've found, tremendous joy in participating in the salesman because it's like, okay, wow. I think I know like the least amount of theology, of everybody in that group. And it's like every time I leave, I'm just like, holy smokes, I learned so much, or wow, I have so much more to learn because I surrounded myself with other men that I respect and look up to, and they hold me to a certain standard. And, those goes to like our principles of life. We just took it upon ourselves to live by a certain way. You kind of touched on some of those, but, tithing, budgeting and investing, taking our wives out for dates, fasting, all these things that are inherent in a Catholic moral worldview, Catholic social teachings. But for me, at least personally, it took being around other laymen. It's like, actually, no, I'm going to hold you accountable to doing this. And it actually gives me like so much joy. I know you just had the author on it. He escapes my name right now.
Connor Gallagher.
Yes, thank you. We're reading, the Well Ordered Family. And I'm just like, this is amazing because one of the things that gives me so much joy now of really having embraced my Catholic faith is it's our culture. And in America, I think we get clowned on a lot for not having any culture, or our culture's like drive-throughs and like Burger King. It's like, that's not my culture. My culture is like the Catholic faith. And that's how I want to raise my family. I want a patron saint. I want a family beatitude. I want, a family motto that we live up to. And so it's like, it just gives me so much more clarity seeing the world through a Catholic moral worldview, because, it's like we can clearly identify as like, is this good or evil? I'm just really excited to, Macy's expecting in July as our first kid, and to raise them, with this idea. It's like, we actually have a culture, and, it's ingrained, within the Catholic Church. And this is just how we live our lives.
Yeah. We have a culture and it's exceptional. And we're excited for you to participate in it. Yeah, no, it's a beautiful thing. It's been a really fun time for me as well, having this group. I think one thing that has been so special about it, I think it's exactly, or pretty close to, I shouldn't say it's like the epitome of, or like the 10 out of 10, but it's pretty close to what I think we should have at a parish, is community of men, right? These kind of like these ideas of small groups. So many parishes across the country really pushing for small groups. The common term is small Christian communities, where you really get to know each other. And we have that opportunity because so many of us go to the same 8 a.m. Mass at Lourdes on Sunday. And it's like we see each other, those of us that have kids, the kids are seeing each other playing together. The wives know each other and are friends, and we get together sometimes, with the wives, and we really like do life together, participate in life together. But the other thing that's beautiful about it, I think my favorite thing that I did intentionally when creating it was hand selecting the people in it, not just doing the kind of, we're having an open men's group, Thursday nights at 6:00 or whatever, like come to the parish. We have events like that occasionally at Lourdes, and they're great, and sometimes they're very well attended, which is awesome. But I still think that this is what's supposed to happen out of that. This is really the end state, is getting to a point where you have guys who are like-minded, who enjoy being around each other, who each have different strengths. Because that's the best thing about our group, I think, is we go on these different topics and rabbit holes, and it's like somebody always has different strengths, where somebody's looking for a new career, needs advice on that, and we can like actually speak into that. And being intentional with it allowed me to pick men who were driven, who are ambitious in life and in their career. Guys who, I'm trying to think. I think all of our guys work not in the church. Not that there's anything wrong, and so like just to give a caveat there, I don't always like to give disclaimers, but I think that's a good one. Not that there's anything wrong with working in the church; that can be good, but I think there's just a similarity to us in our character and the things we like. For the most part, we do have one or two weirdos who aren't that into sports, but it's pretty limited. We try to limit that for sure.
Definitely.
You can only two is the max. Non-sports guys, I think we only have one, but that kind of stuff of just really understanding excellence and wanting to actually say like, let's get more physically fit. Let's go deeper in our prayer lives. Yes, let's see how we can brainstorm and talk about investments or 529s or Bitcoin or real estate or whatever it might be to really game plan, or even just planning our careers and stuff to say like, yes, let's also make more money. Let's make a bigger impact. Let's get more involved, right? And getting to see the fruit of that for me has been really special. Getting to see, you starting to usher in mass, little things, guys going back to confession or getting deeper in their spiritual lives. And, me and Michael going to the gym consistently together now. Those kinds of things have been really cool coming out of it. I think it's a really unique group, and I feel really blessed to be a part of it as well.
No, it's amazing. I'm
awesome.
honored to be a part of it. And, kind of what we're saying. So I'm just our natural, biology. It's like men are ambitious and we will go out and try to conquer and do stuff. It's like, that's literally what we're supposed to do. Right. Yeah. And so I think in our modern culture that is either trying to actively be suppressed. I think the church pushes against that, and specifically the laymen have taken upon themselves to push against that and seek order, seek excellence, and go out and be lead from the front. It's actually, no, I actually don't agree with that. I'm going to do something else, and this is what I'm going to do. So it gives me tremendous confidence in having people that just have my back. Or we've talked about this a lot too, and you've talked about on the pod extensively, where it's just we're social creatures at the end of the day, which is the importance of our community. And I always feel so funny saying some of this stuff out loud, because at one part, one hand, it feels like duh, but then at the other hand, it's actually community, specifically small local communities, are just getting eroded away.
Oh yeah.
In today's day and age, and you almost have to actively seek them out. And this kind of really correlated with Macy and I, completing marriage prep and getting more into the faith. At the time, we have great friends, and we're very fortunate to have them in our lives. But they were kind of from a different point of our lives at times, and so we really put it upon ourselves to seek out that community, and it's been one of the most rewarding things we've ever done. And obviously we found that in the church, found that a lot in the Bitcoin community as well. But when you seek out like-minded individuals that strive to live their lives a certain way, that just bears a ton of fruit. And a lot of it too is just not even necessarily having a conversation with somebody, but I see another man at Lord's who's, dressed nicely and has a big family. It's wow, I want to be like that guy. Look how
right.
he conducts himself.
Yeah.
It's why am I not like that?
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, the intentional aspect of community is so big, because there's so many people who will hear things like this and us talking about the group, and just we have this tendency as humans, right? Oh, I wish I had that. God didn't give me that. And we kind of have this woe is me mentality of just kind of sitting back and waiting for it to happen. But even as you were saying that, I was going through kind of one by one and thinking about, the first time meeting Michael Bell, who's in the group, sitting back, and I went to the men's conference here that we have in Denver, or whatever they call it, retreat kind of thing, once a year, the men's rally, and went there by myself. Somebody had mentioned it at Lord's, and I knew we had a table, but I didn't really know who I was going to be with or who was going to be around. That's where I met him. Was kind of going out there and being bold and getting uncomfortable in that way, or inviting you guys over for the first time. Or I think about Dakota as another good one. Dakota, the first salesman ever to be on Seeking Excellence, actually. But even Dakota, I remember going back, and he's somebody that we had met online. We followed each other on Instagram, and then we recorded a podcast. We hadn't even met in person yet, but it was shortly after I moved to Denver, and he's from here and lives here. And then there was just one point where I was kind of thinking and praying about man, I really need an accountability partner. as somebody who I can talk to about faith, family, finance, really the kind of foundings of our group as well. And I was just praying about it, thinking about it, and he just popped up in my head. And I literally met him once in person at a softball tournament. It was like a day-long softball tournament for Catholic sport. And he wasn't even on my team, but we just both knew we were there. We actually met in person for the first time. And he was somebody I was like, oh, he would be a good one. I wanted to be interested in it. I don't think I had his phone number. I messaged him on Instagram, and that was kind of how our friendship went really deep, really fast, because we just immediately went into some pretty real stuff there. And we met, once or twice a month for almost a year. And yeah, I could just kind of go step by step with each one of just some moment of after, mass or an event at Lourdes or somewhere else, and just saying, hey, can we get your guys' phone number? We'd love to hang out sometime. And how intentional you have to be with that. Hosting, being willing to host and bring people into your home. If you want to have good community, it's not something that just happens. And even for us, it really took a year. Our first year here was pretty dry. Even going to Lourdes, which is like a young adult parish, we still kind of didn't feel like we really had found our people yet. I remember I joined the first men's Bible study that I joined when I came here, and had some great guys in it, and I still, see some of them from time to time and things like that. But I just knew we weren't really clicking. We were at different stages of life. I was the only one. I think I was engaged, and it was, maybe one other engaged guy. Then it was like a bunch of them were just single dudes. And I didn't go to that one for very long. We kind of read like one book together, and I was kind of like, man, I just don't feel. I never felt like the desire to hang out with him outside of that. And I was like, this isn't good for me to feel that way, and that's okay. They may have felt that way about me. It's not a judgment that I'm better or they're worse, but just the fact that you have to be intentional with it. And it's okay to go to one Bible study for 6 weeks and then say, okay, let me try something else. Let me see what else I can find. Or if I can't find it, which is what happened to me, to feel exactly what I want, because I have a different group. As you know, there's 2 men's groups that I attend, and one fills a specific need of going deep into like Bible study and reading scripture, where ours is just a totally different kind of everything else for me, and spiritual, but really practical spirituality and practical holiness, which is seeking excellence, which is everything that I'm most passionate about, So it was a total elevation for me. But I'm sure you've had the same thing, even within the Bitcoin community, of needing to be intentional with actually making friends.
Totally. And, it's like when Macy and I feel so blessed for the way the Lord has guided our life. When we talk to, some of the younger people in our life who are asking some of the same questions we asked ourselves, just even a couple of years ago. It literally, I'm a little bit maybe of an old soul. You're a couple years older than me. You got the salt and pepper pretty dialed in. But it's like, oh, that's awkward. I was like, so like, what do you mean? What do you mean it's awkward? Yeah, it is. Like, we're humans, like we're fallible. It's like, yeah, you might have a like dud conversation. Yeah. Have another one. It's like,
it's not the end of the world.
Literally. And so it's like,
or some people you have like over for dinner, and it's like, oh, that was fun, but they're probably not our best friends.
Yeah.
But some people also, I think even you hear this in dating relationships too, where sometimes the second or third time you hang out, it just elevates. Some people just aren't as comfortable the first time, So there is such variance in that too.
Totally. And it's like, it's really, when you look back on it, like a very low lift to go to an event. And even if you waste an hour or two, like, okay, like you waste an hour or two of your life, but you like put yourself out there, do it again.
Right.
I don't expect to just like strike gold for the, first conversation you have. And, a lot of times, like my play, if I'm at like, Lord's meetup or like Bitcoin meetup, I just like, hey, sorry for barging in. Like, can I join this conversation? See what they're talking about. Introduce yourself. And then you're just in a conversation. Like, it's not that hard.
Right.
So we encourage people to just get involved. Like, you have to get off zero and put yourself out there and see what happens. Because, if you just sit in your apartment and like wither in your own despair, like you're absolutely getting nowhere.
You're not going to go anywhere for sure. Switching gears a little bit, tell me a little bit about what did you think, let's say, even as a kid or high school, what did you imagine that you'd be doing when you grew up professionally?
Yeah, I've always enjoyed money.
Yeah.
My first kind of entrepreneurial endeavor, I don't even know how old I was, maybe like 12. I would literally like walk around my neighborhood and take all the aluminum cans out of the recycling bin on trash day, take them back to my garage, crush them. Then my grandpa and I would take them to the recycling center, and I would, turn them in for aluminum scrap and, get a check for $100 or, whatever it was. And I was like, this is awesome. Then I started mowing lawns and in high school, I was part of, DECA, and always knew it's like I like business. I didn't really know what that meant at the time. It's just, didn't want to go into like sciences or anything like that.
Sure.
Fortunately, met a great mentor in high school, Chuck Harabin, who was a advisor at the DECA Club, which is like a business club in high school. And we still keep in touch to this day. And he worked in corporate finance, and he's retired and runs like his own investment newsletter, Conservative Trader. Highly recommend you guys check it out. And it was like, okay, we started talking about stocks and how do you analyze the business and stuff like that. I thought it was like really interesting. So it's like, okay, I'm going to go to college for finance. And, I want to learn how to make money, how money works, how markets work. And it kind of, piqued my interest. And I always joke now that I'm a Bitcoiner, where it's like I got traditionally trained in finance, and, a lot of good that did me. I always really wanted to get into like the sexy parts of finance, like private equity, investment banking. I've worked in like those fields in like various aspects, like some internships and whatnot. But I really, towards the latter part of college, felt like a calling to entrepreneurship. And I just really see it as a reality of our modern day. Again, this is, something I think you're spot on, where it's like, a W-2 isn't going to cut it. Right. So I have aspirations in life for myself and my family, and, things I want to be able to achieve. And fortunately, I don't know, man, this is where it's like, I actually get pretty jaded on higher education nowadays. And we were talking about that in our chat the other day, but I feel like I've learned so much more out of school, just listening to podcasts and being on Twitter and watching YouTube videos, where I really thank my former roommate, like Noah Marsh, for getting me tapped into like startup Twitter. And so I was just get obsessed with like listening to entrepreneurs and VCs, talk about, what's going on in Silicon Valley, software, SaaS, and all that. And so it's like, okay, it's like pretty confident I need to like start my own company, at this point. And so Basilica is my third company, 2 L's in the making.
Really? I don't think I knew that.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I think I knew it was at least a second, but I don't know that it was third.
Cafe Pay was my prior. It was an employer of record company. We were servicing the restaurant industry, and we made like every mistake in the book. We literally just like blew through a bunch of funding. Didn't have a diversified cap table. We tried to start a remote native company, which had a bunch of challenges. Managing employees, and underestimated our market size and how hard it was to sell that market. So it was a great learning experience, but really kind of transitioned from finance, and it's like, this is actually pretty rigid and ultimately capped. If you work any W-2 job, there's some lucrative finance job, but you're still paying somebody else's rent, right? And so it's like, well, if I'm gonna at least try to get ahead, like, you have to build equity for yourself in whatever you're doing.
Yeah. No, I think that's really big. That was kind of one thing that I thought about when you were talking about how W-2 is not enough. Having equity is definitely a huge bonus if you do have W-2. I think that's a huge aspect of it. And yeah, just going back to what we said about, marriage too, or just the intentionality or the desire for men to have this kind of burning passion for providing well. Not everybody needs to have it. I'm sure that God calls some people to, simple lives, to poverty, or just specific missions that don't make a lot of money. I don't deny that that's true, but I don't think it's the vast majority, especially of American men, because we have the opportunity to make it, where there's billions of people in the world who don't have the opportunity to make a lot of money and really be successful. So I often tell when women will kind of ask, and this was a part of our talk for the high school the other night, of, well, how do I look for a partner, a spouse who's going to really exemplify these virtues and do this? It's like, what a lot of secular women get wrong is they want somebody who's 25, 26, making 3K and 6'2", and all these, very specific and unique things. When you see these interviews with women on the street and just stupidity, or some of those podcasts where they interview usually not the brightest women in the world. But I think it's really good for you to just be able to see, even if you're, for you, like trying and failing in certain things, but just the desire, the ambition, the drive to really work hard, which ultimately is virtue. Can you go overboard? Yes, but you can also fall into vice with insufficient amounts of drive and discipline and diligence, right? So I think it's really important to have that. And that's something that's cool in your story, to just see how, you've done a number of different things, but you've really been driven the whole time. You've kind of had that fire to want to make money since you were a kid collecting soda cans.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Which is awesome.
Yeah. And, too, it's kind of like what we were talking about with community. It's just about being intentional and putting yourself out there. It's like, yes, I mean, starting your own business is challenging. Like, don't get me wrong. I do kind of like the joke, just because I've certainly fallen into this. Like, I didn't want to work a 9 to 5, so I work all the time.
Yeah.
And there is an aspect of that. I do think it's much more rewarding working for yourself than somebody else. But it's ultimately, it's on the other side of that is like, it's not that hard either. It's like there are a ton of businesses out there. You don't need to invent something new. You don't need to do something novel. It's like you just go out and do something better than what the next guy does, or you just put your own unique spin on it. Right. It's like, I have a wealth management firm. There are 300,000 financial advisors in the United States. I'm part of the Bitcoin Financial Advisors Network. There's 9 of us.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I've identified something that is important and unique to me, and not necessarily unique to me, but unique, and it's like what you'll find passionate about. And it's like, if you're passionate about something, like, that will radiate through your work. And I try to pray about this constantly, is just to have the Lord work through me in my work, just to add more intentionality to it. And ultimately, if you're an entrepreneur, sales is a crucial part. You got to get business in the door, and people can see through phonies, like, very easy.
Yeah.
I think that's something almost everybody has a sense of. It's like, this guy's kind of like a fraud. It's pretty easy to pick up.
This guy's full of it.
Yeah. And I think the only way around that is you're actually passionate and have joy, like, in what you're doing.
Yeah, you're excited about it.
Exactly. That's what the main reason why I founded Basilica as Bitcoin company. That's what I call it. We still do TradFi services, but I'm only going to sell you, and for you to become a client, if you believe I'm genuine and I'm speaking truth, like, from my heart, because otherwise I'm just trying to sell you something.
Right. Yeah. No, it's really big. I think I was just talking with the young man about this the other day. He was somebody who had been in seminary before, was kind of out in the world working a job he wasn't remotely passionate about, or isn't remotely passionate about. And I was kind of going over the 3 core things of really finding your niche in the world, of just something you're passionate about, something you're good at, and the need that the world has, which I think kind of goes back to what you're saying of, you don't have to reinvent the wheel necessarily, but just even your unique passion or your unique skill or talent in that area and the needs of the world. When you can find that, that's really, I think, the kind of key thing that's going to set you on fire. And not all of us get to do that, I don't think, for the rest of our lives, or have that be the kind of main way that we make money. But it can be a great even side hustle for guys, especially if you're trying to be a provider for your family, to think about where those 3 things intersect. And that's essentially what I do, is like those 3 things for me are speaking, it's creating content, the coaching program. Like, these things are super fun to me. There's so much passion behind it. I think that I'm talented in it, and there's a need for it. But you don't necessarily get to just go do that out of college, which is what a lot of people want. I think a lot of young people want to just make $250,000 and find those 3 things all at 10, right?
Yeah.
And just kind of start there. And that's just not how it works. You have to kind of dig your way up from it. But so many people, and I just see it so often in young men, they just only think of the passion part, which is why so many of them are passionate about their faith, and they say to themselves, well, then I need to just go be a youth minister. I need to go work at a parish. I need to stay a focus missionary forever, or whatever it is. That this is not a anti-focus podcast, unless you want to talk about it. But no, I'm just kidding. But this is truly, I think, I see that, and even a lot of people when they apply at Hallow now, and I've had dozens of conversations in the last few weeks because we sent out a user-wide email about job openings. And I hear so many people that they love Howell and they want to work there. And I'm like, I get that for sure. I think it's good for the company, but especially the young ones, I try to really steer them to, where do you want to see, where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? What do you want to be doing? If you don't think sales, if that has no passion for you and no drive, that doesn't excite you, then don't just come work here just because you want to work here. I mean, maybe it's better than doing sales somewhere else, but what if sales is not what you want to do, right? Like, do you want to be a real estate agent? Do you want to go back and learn a trade? Like, there's a lot of needs in the world, and there could be something you genuinely enjoy and are passionate about. And just because you love Jesus doesn't mean that you need to be talking about Jesus 24/7 or be doing that from 9 to 5 every day. And there's a certain aspect too, and I'm sure you probably experienced this as well, where when you do start to do your full-time job or your passion as your full-time job, sometimes it wears off a little bit. That excitement can actually start to decrease. And I've seen that in people in parishes and dioceses across the board. In every state, parish, every place I've been, I've seen people who were once really on fire that now actually have somewhat lukewarm faith because they're kind of just always around it. But it kind of loses its novelty and its, the specialness to it, where there's been in history devout farmers who are in front of a tabernacle once a week on Sunday who have a really, really deep faith, because it's almost like this is really special. I pray all the time outside of the church, but now this is when I'm actually like close to Jesus, and you take it a little more seriously. So there's a lot there. But for you, I'm curious, for you, have you had that experience, or what kind of has been your journey as an entrepreneur, especially in this current venture of doing something you're passionate about? How do you kind of keep that passion going even when it's kind of your job and it comes with a lot of stress underneath it as well?
Yeah, simply like giving up to the Lord. And I had to like create something to be passionate about.
Yeah.
So I think that has a big part, to do with it. And just like the greater purpose within my life, I'm hoping everything goes according to plan. Macy will be able to, stay home and raise our kid. And so it kind of takes on a little bit more weight and responsibility outside of work, where this is like the main vehicle for our family to build wealth, and support is like me running and growing the business. So just framing it, in like the greater context of things. And ultimately too, I reflect back on those failures. And I think not the only reason, but a big reason why they failed is I was chasing money. I wasn't like slightly passionate about payroll and workers' comp and restaurants. I just thought I could make a lot of money. And then it was very easy to get burnt out and just like bear the stress of a startup. And one thing that you've helped me with is just to, seek excellence as a Catholic. Obviously, tithing and charity are, core parts and core tenets of our faith, while still being a capitalist and wanting to, build something. And I always get excited about what Basilica could turn into and what we can do to support the faith, or, various missions that Macy and I hold dear to our heart. And that just gives me the ability to grind through the muck. And, there's a lot of muck. I'm a heavily regulated industry. There's a lot of compliance. There's certain parts of the job, I hate, like, email monkey. Like, I hate being an email monkey, but, it kind of comes with the territory. And so I really, have, prayed for the Lord to like work through me in my work, as I've always liked working, and my work is always something I've taken, very seriously. It gives me like a tremendous amount of, pride and value, and just being able to try to spread the gospel. Or I really kind of do this most through encouraging and coaching and teaching people, helping people be good stewards of their wealth. So like the more I can identify the faith just in my day to day, like the easier it is for me to get through it. One of the things I've recently started doing is like this morning I was working on compliance stuff. I do like my yearly annual review and update on my clients on any changes to all my disclosures and stuff. And I've just been really dreading it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, this is just like the chores, right? I just sat down and prayed first. I was like, fill me with the Holy Spirit and, allow me to get through this so I can do, other things. And so you're not going to like every part of what you do. And it's like, I enjoy the days when I get to, work with people that are passionate about our mission and how we're, growing together and whatever that may be. And you got to cherish those. But when the other, chores, if you will, come up, like you can't just turn your head and stick your head in the sand. You have to embrace those as well. And so I'm really trying to lean on the faith in the Lord to help me get through those parts. So I'm even more excited about the passion parts.
Yeah. one thing that was really apparent in your presentation the other night, and when you get to this topic is, and even in things that you said so far in this episode, is you have a strong disdain for evil.
That's right.
And which I think is really good. And it's something that you and I share. And what I think that does for both of us when it comes to working hard in our drive is we know that that's ultimately what we're fighting against. And when you know that, you believe that, it's kind of something I try to close almost every talk that I give with, of how do we look at Jesus Christ on the cross, or look at our family, at our children. You'll have this experience in 6 months where you look at your child and you're just blown away with the love that you have for them and love that you have for your wife. And then also just like all the people out there who we know are just being duped or swindled by the world, by nefarious actors, by people who want them to be in despair and apathy and ignorance. And how do you not be moved even just for them? And I usually do those 3 tiers backwards in the opposite order of kind of escalating, but it's like any of these should be motivation enough to get up on time, to work hard each and every day, right? To try to be the best that we can be and put our all into this, because God obviously deserves it. We owe him everything that we have, everything that we are. Our families deserve the best version of us, and for us to really put our all into everything, whether that be something that excites us or not. And then also the people out there, right? There's people out there who you are called to help, who I'm called to help, that if we just stop, if we just, don't do it as well, or if we don't take the time or try to do it with excellence, that we're not going to reach. And that to me has always been so powerful, to just think about the people whose lives you could have changed and didn't. To me is the kind of secondary point that Goggins, David Goggins likes to make of what he thinks hell would be like, is to see himself. He describes himself when he was like a cockroach exterminator. I don't know how much you know about David Goggins' story.
I did not know that.
He was literally this like overweight. There's a picture of him in the book. I probably have it here. I can show you that he was an overweight cockroach exterminator, and he literally saw like a commercial for the Navy late at night one night, or the Air Force, I think first, because he first joined the Air Force, and went to be a pararescue guy. And he's like shoving his face with donuts and doing all this stuff. And he had this almost like vision or moment where he felt like at the end of his life, if God were to show him like, oh, you were supposed to go be a Navy SEAL, but instead you were just like an overweight cockroach exterminator that like never lived your life. And he talks about the life that he's living now, to just imagine himself at the end of his life, seeing all the things he's done now, and just having been complacent and miserable for 50 years or 60 years, 80 years, whatever it would have been. I think the other side of that's really moving to me. But the other side of it is also seeing all the people you could have helped, or you should have helped, whether that be in any of the 7 pillars, right? I think that whether you're a financial advisor, whether you're a real estate agent helping people to find their home for their families, whether you're a marriage counselor or somebody who's helping with counseling and therapy and helping people with their mental health or their relationships, whether you're a college professor, right? There's so many different things, and almost every job in some capacity is serving and improving society, or else it wouldn't succeed, it wouldn't be built, it wouldn't grow. And so whatever it is, you're supposed to improve and help people and move society along, to build up the world and to see the people you could have helped, right? People who might otherwise have lost a ton of money or just wasted their finances or missed out on huge opportunities, and they won't because of the work that you've done, I think is so inspiring. And yeah, definitely helps me. And I just, when I say this in talks and in conferences, I'm like, it boggles my mind that everybody doesn't think that way.
Yeah.
Moved like that. Some people just don't care about any of that.
Totally. And, that's where I think our modern secular culture has done an extreme disservice to men, that I think the church actually does a great job doing, is identifying, like, we are in a spiritual battle every day. And I think there's something, innate within men that, kind of gets us riled up and excited. And it certainly does for me, because it now feels like I have a purpose and something greater than myself to contribute to. And I think, particularly in the West, I certainly don't consider myself a violent person. I think, we compete in the realm of ideas for civilized society, but particularly in the West, like, we have like this savior complex where we just look for like a political savior to make everything right. And that's just not the case. We read a great book in the Salesman, and it did a great job going through how, the West, which I believe is like the pinnacle of human civilization, was built on Christianity. and high trust Christian societies. And that only happens if anybody, whatever they're doing in their work, chooses to seek excellence and, strive to do the best they can. And if you just kind of, I always try to, frame things in my head where it's like, okay, if I'm in this spiritual battle, obviously I'm not like physically fighting at a battlefield, but there's evil around us, every day. It only works, like a high trust Christian society only works if each of us, all the participants, know and understand that and choose to opt into good and deny and fight the bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And the classic phrase there, that the only thing needed for evil to succeed is for good men to sit around and do nothing. Right? It's such a temptation. And that was one of the things we actually talked about. This will be a core part of that podcast I referenced earlier with Emily. But Father Mike Schmitz, at the conference that I was at with him a few weeks ago, one of the things he really hit on was the two biggest temptations for men and for women. He said for women, the biggest temptation is control. For men, the biggest temptation is passivity. And that's exactly, everything that you just hit on there, I think, is just the temptation to just be passive and just kind of let things happen and let evil dominate and dictate the world, which is obviously no good, which has happened, some would argue, in our financial system. And so once again, turning gears a little bit, I thought you did an amazing job the other night, really laying out the case for why our current financial system is so complicated. One of the things that was most moving to me when I went through LPR, the leadership program in the Rockies, which we recently talked about a little bit, is when we went through taxes and just like the tax code, right? That used to be, 150 pages, 200 pages, which is kind of absurdly long for a tax code. And now it's like, I don't even know how many, but thousands. I know it's in the thousands of pages. It's incomprehensible. And there's so many things in just the book of United States legislation and regulations that contradict each other, or just the one thing that they really hit on in that program was there's so many laws on the books that almost every day, multiple times a day, all of us break laws.
Yeah.
Which is a sign of a totalitarian state in a sense, because then they can just kind of arrest you at any point. Because there's some law that you've broken, whether you know it or not. When there's thousands and thousands of pages, you can't even know all the laws that exist. Right? I mean, think about you work in a heavily regulated industry. It's very similar there, where it's like there's so much regulation. How can any one person actually comprehend and know the law in financial regulations, in real estate regulations, right? In tax regulations? It's like almost everybody has to break the law because there's just so many of them, and they're not even understandable. Or like I said, in many cases, whether it's farming or you name it, agriculture, it's like there's so many that kind of contradict each other that you almost can't do anything right, which is super frustrating. But I think going back to what I said, the thing that you did really well that was helpful that I'd love to start with is just kind of the basics of what money is, because I think it really does set up to help people understand what Bitcoin is and why it might be a better alternative to our current system.
Totally. No, I think you nailed it right there. And these are two topics, Bitcoin and Catholicism, I'm extremely passionate about. So I was been thinking about this for a while, and this is a presentation I wanted to do for a while and prayed about for a long time. And so I was thinking about how I could connect the dots. I kind of had to do like some prior work and some thinking. And to your point on like the regulation side of things, yes, I'm a licensed fiduciary, state registered or regulated entity, and our slogan is prosperity but purpose, and we try to help our clients find funded contentment where money and meaning are in balance. I have a tremendous amount of joy when we're able to do that, but on the back end, it's almost like the compliance. It takes up a ton of my time. It's my biggest line item, in my
budget.
It has to be. And it almost feels like you're walking in the dark and there's like bear traps everywhere. And it's just like, well, don't step in a bear trap. And it's like, okay, well, I'm trying not to step in a bear trap. Could you turn the lights on, please?
Yeah.
It's like,
no.
Yeah, exactly. And ultimately where I think like the West is starting to fail here, and why, I think Bitcoin can really reinvigorate it, is I think humans are technological beings. I think that's actually, a gift from God. Like, we've created beautiful, amazing civilizations over the course of our existence, but they always have one failure, and it's when the technological superior civilization centralizes the money. That is the bane of human existence. And usually when a civilization is on the rise, there's some sort of technological schism that allows for a new paradigm shift. And it's usually ambitious young men that are leading that charge and on the forefront of building. And while we're like in the building phase, that's tend to be when like markets are the freest, market signals are the most clear because capitalists are deploying capital and creating more capital. And that usually tends to be good for a long time, right? This is like the gilded age of any civilization. It's like on the rise. That's like when there's like the least amount of regulation and red tape because people can go out and do what they feel called to do. The issue is when the bureaucrats get involved. It's like I think it's like the worst type of people are attracted to power. And so after you've been on the rise for a long time and it's milk and honey everywhere, we have the people who can't compete in a free and open market, so they have to compete in lawfare. Right. And it really is almost a tale as old as time because almost every civilizational collapse is like the same story. It's nothing to do with the technology. It's everything to do with the people who corrupt the technology or the civilization that once got them to these great heights. And I really kind of with that background, Lynn Alden and Larry Lepard are two great advocate and economists in the Bitcoin space that I've really enjoyed reading their work and inspired me to ultimately, create this presentation and try to educate Catholics on why our current financial system is failing and why we need to look for an alternative.
Yeah, I think not only are some of the worst people drawn to power, I think that's especially true when you're talking about power that is not really earned.
Yes,
in a sense, right? Because that's one of the things about politics is so often it's kind of like this elevator to the top of being able to control things. But unlike, and you've had a lot of capitalists who have gone wayward, right? We could talk about Rockefellers and other, massive companies, George Soros, right? There's a lot of billionaires and Bill Gates who are, I think, not necessarily the best actors or the most well-intentioned people. But there is something unique to their rise in that they like hustled and grinded for the influence that they have versus, somebody like a Bernie Sanders who is very anti-money, anti-wealth, anti-the rich. Millionaires and billionaires are bad until I become a millionaire. And now billionaires are the evil ones, right? Because he's able to make all this money selling books and doing things that are capitalist. I think it's an interesting thing that there's so many bureaucrats in the country. Even that was one thing that I actually wanted to talk about. You had this on one of your slides was about it was I think the slide that showed the national debt. I think it was a debt ticker.
Yeah.
And the thing that I thought was so interesting about that was the slide had how many self-employed Americans there were, which I think was around 9 million. If I'm not mistaken, I think there was like 130 million total federal like taxable people, so like income tax paying citizens, if you will. I forget what the actual like title was, but 130 million of those, there was like 9 million self-employed Americans, and then it was like 33 million government employed Americans, which to me was just thinking about like, dude, if you just, the thing that is so clarifying for me oftentimes is trying to have play this mind game, if you will, or a mental exercise of let's just start with a society with 100 people. Like let's say like Desert Island. This is what I talk about when I gave a speech a few years ago on is healthcare a human right? And I'm like, the best thing, I love the island experiment, right? Like we crash a plane, 100 or so of us survive. There's 100 people. Would we say that if somebody was a doctor, like they are forced to care for everyone with no compensation, or who pays for it, right? Like just thinking about things like that. And there's a lot. It's an hour-long speech, so I'm not going to summarize that or get too deep into that. But thinking about this, it's like if there was 100, would you think that 30 of them, or 20 of them, like what would be the number of people who are paying for the government employees to the people who are the government employees? Like, what's that ratio look like? To me, it certainly can't be, I don't know what 130 to the 30 is, but like 4 to 1. that feels like it's probably a little off. That'd be in the group of 100. That's 80 to 20.
Yeah.
There's 80 of us, and we're supporting the salary of 20 of you who are just kind of making sure we're all playing by the rules and doing things. Can't that be 5 of you? You know, that do that?
Yeah.
Like, do we really? It should be 95-5, not 80-20, not 4-1. It's just insane to me that that's gotten so lopsided. But I think that goes to your point where government just continues to expand. The same thing as the tax code, right? Because every time you add 1,000 pages to the tax code, you need 1,000 new government employees to ensure that we're handling these regulations and things correctly. And you don't even have laws being passed in so many of these circumstances, which is one of, I think, Trump's best executive orders is like no more regulations for the first 90 days. Because you have people who are not even elected officials not implementing laws because that's illegal. That is not in accord with the American system. But they just implement regulations. And yes, you still get fined or sometimes can even go to prison if you violate those regulations. And it's not a law, so Congress doesn't have to pass it. The president doesn't need to sign it. But it's just these regulations that we just roll out and keep piling on and restricting what can and cannot happen in the United States of America, which is, no good. Very bad.
It's not. And one of my favorite economists, his name is Peter St. Onge. He has a weekly newsletter, 20-minute podcast. So it's very digestible. And he was constantly raking on the Biden administration. Yeah, we're at the point, and this is a symptom of a fiat system, but most of our government statistics are manipulated or fake, like most notably, CPI, which is the Consumer Inflation Index. They do a lot of dirty tricks with this. So, they used to have, grade A beef or, sirloin steak as that category of like meat. And so, they sub it out for, like 70% lean ground beef. So it's like they do all these things in the back end. It's like, no, prices aren't rising. Like, be docile.
You can get the cheaper version of the thing we used to track.
Exactly.
For the same price that the old thing used to be. Yeah. Your filet mignon is now the cost of a New York strip.
Yes.
Or New York strip is the cost of what filet used to cost. And so therefore prices are the same because they're both red meat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And he's been really on top of the drastic growth of government employees and the government trotting these out. It's like, oh, look at these job numbers. Like, they're great. Well, you're just hiring federal employees with printed money. It's actually not great at all.
Yeah, that's always my favorite stat is how many jobs are added under each presidency. And it's like the president doesn't add jobs to the economy. That's not a thing that happens. Not in a well-run economy, at least. Jobs are only added by private citizens and when their businesses grow and flourish, right? Not by the president. I'd never understand. I think that's such a stupid statistic.
Well, and that's why I get really frustrated with like the Bernie bros and like the blue hair baristas because like capitalism's our problem. And my rebuttal to that is like we live in a socialist society right now. Right. We have a government that is designed to grow bigger. And there's a famous, or hopefully gets more famous. I can't remember the court case. I think it was Valero or started with a V, but it really just set the precedent for agencies to enact regulations. And so it's like the EPA was like, okay, these are the regulations you have to follow. And to your point, like these aren't laws. They're not passed by Congress. They were not enacted by individuals who were voted on by the American people.
No.
These are career bureaucrats that are deciding how the economy works, how the government is run, and we actually have very little say in that.
Yeah. I have to get you a copy of this book. One of the professors in leadership program of the Rockies, his name is Tom Cranwood. He wrote this great book. It's a satirical book called Save the Swamp. And it's like a bureaucrat's guide to their career. And it is, man, really, really good.
I need to read that.
It's really, really hilarious. Yeah. I'll look for it when we're done here to see if I have it here. I think it's at home. But next time you come over, I'll show you. Well, I'll definitely have to get you a copy of that. That can be your thank you for coming on the CCS podcast.
I appreciate that.
It's so good. But yeah, it just hits on all of that, man. Of just like, you get to have all this power and control. You don't have to run for election. You're never up. Your seat's never up. He's like, this is really the way to go. And you can make a good career. It's hard to get fired. You almost can't get fired from some of these government jobs. And he just, goes on all these things with all these perks and just basically screw the American people and don't have to run for election like other politicians do and things like that. So it's really funny. You'll enjoy that.
Yeah.
But going back to what we talked about. So let's go over a little definition. We give just a little, brief explanation to what is money, kind of how I like the history that you gave of, obviously, exchanges, trading and stuff, bartering has existed for a long time, but then really escalated when this concept of money was introduced.
Totally. And I'll just back it up a little bit further as well, just to frame it in like the Catholic context here. I got this idea from Andy Flattery, who is a great Catholic man. He's also a financial advisor. He started the Bitcoin Financial Advisors Network, and he's the one that turned me on to this idea of the noblesse oblige, which stands for nobility obligates. And it's essentially about old Catholic Catholic families of old Europe who built a tremendous amount of wealth, raised saints. Like, we have a long history of this, in our faith and culture, of being good stewards of our wealth and taking care of our communities. And so I think it's easy to get pessimistic about, the current state of affairs, but, I think you and I are actually optimists, and you have to be entrepreneurs. I consider myself a techno optimist, and I kind of think of Bitcoin as like that technological schism we were referencing earlier, and kind of like hopefully the dawn of a new golden age. And kind of so how we got here is like money really is a technology and a ledger, simply. And over the course of time, this is inspired by Lynn Alden's work. Like, money has adopted to the technology and societal structures of that time. So people used to trade shells and rocks. Obviously, gold and precious metals became very commonly accepted forms of money. But any money is a medium of exchange, so it's an intermediary for you and I to exchange value. You sell a service or a product. How am I compensating you for that? It's a store of value, so it's supposed to preserve our purchasing power over time. And it's a unit of account, which is, you can kind of think of as an economic measuring stick, right? I really kind of added the fourth point, but it's like money is a market itself. If individuals had the ability to choose from them, like for themselves, they would just choose the best one that fulfills all those requirements in the best way possible. And this kind of will build on as we continue this conversation. But money is like the base market. So money and energy touch everything we do, right? So every other market is built on top of the market of money. Whether that's me selling services to my clients, it's built on the base market. And kind of like some of the nefarious things about fiat money, which is paper money. And Lynn uses a great analogy in her book about the telegraph, and that was invented in the mid 1800s, and that was a new technology that allowed information to travel at the speed of light. Well, if we were still using gold as a predominant form of money, we now had a technology where a ledger could be updated in London and then simultaneously updated in New York almost instantly. But the gold, or the physical money, couldn't travel that fast. So paper money, or fiat money, was invented. And fiat money is simply a currency without intrinsic value. It's backed by the government, which makes it flexible but prone to inflation and mismanagement. And you can really kind of start building the picture here of how that base market of money can easily be manipulated when it's not backed by something physical and grounded in the real world.
Yeah. And just to clarify, the way that I kind of think of a ledger, and God bless Bitcoin does a really good job of explaining this, but I kind of think of it as a tracker, or like a record, if you will, of transactions.
Yeah.
Right. So a ledger is, at its base, it's kind of to think about it as your credit card statement, or if you look at your checking account, you can see all the transactions that have happened, deposits and withdrawals, but it kind of tracks that on both sides, right? There's ledgers happening kind of all over the place. So if I pay you for let's say I Venmo you, right? Venmo is contacting USAA on my end to make sure that I have the money, taking the money out of my account, which tracks on that ledger for my checking account, puts it into Venmo, and then Venmo puts it into your Venmo account, and then Venmo puts it into, Chase or whatever bank you use, right? And there's kind of the transactions at each kind of stage of that, and the kind of receipts are tracking all the things that have happened. Is that right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And when the technology emerged for ledgers to be updated, in that fashion, they needed a money to accompany that. And
That
so
speed.
obviously, yeah, exactly. And, at the time, that was a good thing. I think that actually opened up markets and made them, more global and more accessible, which allowed more market participants to partake. And that ultimately is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's just a very easy way to think about money. The problem is our current financial system looks nothing like that simple T chart you learned in accounting
Right.
101.
Yeah.
It's actually gotten extremely bloated, and there's a 800-pound gorilla in the room called the U.S. Federal Reserve that is putting their finger on the scale and manipulating that base market of money. And that's where I think
credit card companies and all these other things that take out little transaction fees along the way and all that as well, that I think just very much complicate the system.
Yeah.
Because you can think about it, I think the easiest way to kind of just make it a simple example, if I just hand you $5, that's just $5 from me to now you own that $5. But really, when things did become, because that's kind of the next step, I'm assuming too, that you get into where paper money is introduced. But then now you made this point the other night where it's like pretty much all electronic anyways, right? Like there are very few of us. I have $2 cash in my wallet right now. I know this because we were just looking to pay for parking earlier today. And so instead of me handing you $1 and now I lost $1, you have $1, and that's not really tracked anywhere. Now, even with the credit card companies, like it's so funny that nobody even knows what Visa does. They're just on every credit card, and it's just like this $1 trillion company. But it's because they take these transaction fees or Square. So I pay with my Visa on your Square card, right? If you're buying a Seeking Excellence t-shirt or something, it's like all these different banks and communications between banks is so complicated, and there's all this money is kind of sucked away throughout the whole process, right? Of a kind of every little step along the way.
Yeah. And, as a capitalist, being charitable, Visa does provide a service. They've built out like these rails. I'm not saying like they shouldn't receive a fee for that service, but, if you just zoom out, the whole system is extremely bloated and overly complex. Yeah, I called it, complexity by design.
Yeah.
And it's very unnatural. And the only people who create unnatural systems are bureaucrats, right? And the Leviathan, the managerial class, because they don't actually have value to add.
Right.
They need to like preserve the power that they've captured, right? So these aren't the builders. Any sort of entrepreneur would see our current financial system, if they were able to build it by scratch and like overly simplify it, right? And because it's complex,
especially if they were actually fiduciaries. And not
have the best interest.
They were actually meant to serve the American people and do what's best for them instead of just looking out for themselves and their friends and making more jobs.
Yeah.
For no reason.
No, totally. And, to that point, I don't think a lot of people know it's like the Federal Reserve was created in 1913. It's like it's barely over 100 years old. America's about to turn 250. So actually for like almost the majority of this country's existence, like the Federal Reserve wasn't around. Right. And a lot of, historians argue like the Gilded Age of America was actually like early 1900s, late 1800s, like even before the existence of the Federal Reserve. And to your point, the Federal Reserve is a private public partnership. Like it's owned partly by the government, partly by big banks. And, there's a board of governors, and it is very much like a boys club. There's a great podcast I'll send you. You can maybe include in the show notes, but just a historian kind of like looking into the depths of the Federal Reserve. Like a lot of these records do eventually become public, and it is very, 12 Federal Reserve Board governors that serve the branches, across the country: San Francisco, Minneapolis, St. Louis, Kansas City, New York, like 12 of these. And they vote on, various issues, and it's very taboo to dissent and not have all 12 board governors on the same page.
Wow.
It's like once you're in the system, and I think like a lot of these people had nefarious intentions from the start. Probably not. I like not to think so, but it's a little bit, of a groupthink mentality and part of our human nature. It's like once you're in it, like it's hard to, see, something else, and you just feel like you're that much more important and all of that.
Yeah.
And so, this really in particular came down to like this historian on the podcast, goes in like the 2008 financial crisis, and like quantitative easing. And I think like really like the point of no return when we just became dependent on printing money and continuous money growth is that only one person, dissented against that, and their career was essentially ruined. They didn't get the job at the big bank afterwards, and so was
Wow.
exiled as a black sheep. So there's really like this human element to all of this that has like influence. That's where I personally think, and bring in the Catholic moral worldview again, like we need to call a spade, where it's like I think a lot of these people worship a lower power. They propagate human suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. The human suffering aspect of it is so big with so many of these things that are pushed through, whether it's regulation or laws, where on the surface it's so tricky with Catholic teaching. I think with a lot of monetary policy or economics or even just leftism as a whole, whether it's Black Lives Matter or it's electric vehicles or it's immigration, right? It's so easy for them on the surface to make it seem like, oh, isn't this so mean? Oh, they want to cut back the government. You guys think there's 30 million too many? Well, how many should there be? You're just gonna fire 10 million people. They have families to support, all this stuff. It's like, yeah, but they suck the life out of 100, 200 million people, 300 million people. So yes, they actually have to go find other jobs and actually produce like the rest of us, and not just be like a drain on the system. Yes, that's true. Oh, you guys like immigration is so bad. It's like, okay, yeah, we want there to be less crime. And actually, if you look at it even deeper, there's human trafficking, drug trafficking. The cartels are taking over Mexico and our border and a lot of the United States. That's bad. That's much worse than sending some people back to the country where they were born and raised and lived most of their lives, right?
Yeah.
That's much more immoral. Or going back to the fracking, all these things, like we need to care about the planet, and natural gas and oil are so bad. Okay, well, are you ready to just thrust millions of people around the world into immense poverty and starvation because you're just getting rid of fertilizer and you're getting rid of oil and natural gas, and you're going to jack up energy prices saying that they have to have, run nuclear power or be solar powered in Africa? It's like they can't afford these things. So you're just totally cutting them out, at the knees. But it's on the surface, everything seems so good, right? Socialism, leftism, like all that seems so good on the surface. And I think that's a lot of times true with the financial policies. Like people are going to take advantage of you. So we have to have 60 million regulations for financial advisors rather than going back to the first golden age, which was really before not just the Fed, but so many regulations and unnecessarily laws and regulations that really just tampered the American spirit.
No, 100%. And yeah, I do think money printing at its core is evil. And to your point on like the debt clock, you can go to usdebt.org and it's just like the numbers like update so fast. Like our debt is increasing. Like the numbers are
It's over
just
100K per person.
It's insane. No, yeah, it's really wild. And what really concerns me and why I'm so bullish and optimistic on Bitcoin is in our federal budget, the top two line items are Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. These are our welfare programs, which again, it's like I was mentioning earlier, it's like we already live in a socialist society. Like we are literally spending the top two on welfare programs. The third is literally our interest on debt. Usually, how this is supposed to work, or kind of like the social contract in the US, is like we have free markets. You guys go out and do whatever you do, add value. We're just going to take a little bit to fund these public services. Well, as we know, that's not really the contract anymore, and
Right.
we spend so much where our tax receipts aren't able to fund all the obligations we have outstanding as a country. So we need to issue debt in order to make up the gap. And it's getting, very concerning, in my opinion, because we've surpassed debt to GDP of 120%. Japan has been the only country in the history of the world, or at least civilized world, to have surpassed that without a major economic or currency collapse. So it's just kind of a novel number there, and there's some like unique things about their economy which has allowed them to do so. So we predominantly fund our ventures on debt, which means we're borrowing from the future, and there needs to be somebody to buy debt, right? This used to be sovereign nations. It's like if I'm Germany or China, it's like, oh, this is a good deal. The US is issuing some treasury bonds. I'll buy those and I'll get paid back interest. Well, if you keep issuing debt, it's not as good a deal anymore. But there still
Right.
needs to be, a buyer. This is a market after all. So it's like, okay, we need more dollars. So we're going to issue debt to get the dollars. Well, who's going to buy that? Well, now it really ends up being the Federal Reserve that is like buying the debt, and they're doing so with printed money. So the Federal Reserve funds the Treasury with printed money. And the nefarious thing about this is that ultimately leads to inflation. I mentioned, I think CPI is a fake stat. So when I'm sitting down with my clients and doing a financial plan or whatever, I use just money creation as the inflation rate. And that averages out to be about 6 to 8% over the last 2 years, year over year. So
Wow.
you, as a hardworking market participant, are getting debased. Your wealth is being stolen from you silently, which is even worse. They're not even telling it to your face. It's just kind of happening in the background by 6 to 8%. 30-40% of all money in circulation has been printed over the last 6 years. And this is kind of like Lynn Alden has this meme where it's like, nothing stops this train. It's the cat's out of the bag. It's like you're not putting it back in there. It's just like, what do you do next? And that's why I'm really encouraging Catholics have an open mind about Bitcoin.
Yeah. Dude, it's crazy to think about that. So that means that, the average stock market return, if you're just, investing in like the S&P 500, somewhere from between 8 to 12%, right? Typically. And so that means that if you're on like the lower end of that, right? If you're not really aggressively in like the higher, more aggressive stocks, that you're just, even if you're making 8%, that's just keeping your money the same.
Yeah, you're breaking even.
Yeah, so with 8%, bro, that is absolutely mind blowing.
Yeah. Well, and there are, a lot of, like we said, it's complexity by design. So there's hidden dynamics that, allow them to do this. I really want to emphasize, like, these are unnatural systems, right? Like it's not supposed to be this way. It shouldn't be this way.
It's supposed to be what we talked about earlier, where you hand me $5 and you lost $5 and I gained $5.
Yes,
right? That's how simple it's supposed to be.
Yeah, you
and
just
nobody
can't
else
create
even
more.
needs to know that.
Yeah,
because we're just private citizens, just doing private business.
Yes, exactly, and that's that's biblical.
Right.
It's like neighbor to neighbor. It's like we don't need a tyrant. It's like
there's not some third party that says, "Whoa, did you just give him $5? Like, what's it? Why do you care?"
Yeah,
You
exactly.
know? Yeah,
That's one of the things I love to say about Bitcoin. It's like no tyrant needed. It's like we don't need that third party intermediary. It's like, oh, is that a legal transaction? It's like, yes. Or are you sure? It's like, well, it's none of your business.
Right.
It's like,
So tell me, is this a good place to kind of get into the definition of Bitcoin? Is there stuff you want to share?
Yeah,
Anything else
no.
you want to kind of lay the foundation?
It is. So I'll just read this here. So Bitcoin is a decentralized, censorship-resistant digital currency with a fixed supply, enabling secure, transparent, and trustless peer-to-peer transactions across a global borderless network.
Powerful.
I would say, what are your instant reactions to
that? That was a lot of words for sure. I think decentralized is a word that really stands out from somebody who's, mildly in the space compared to you. That's a big term in there that's really important. Peer-to-peer is another one that's really important. We were just kind of hitting on that. Of just like it goes from one person to the other person, which is beautiful. But talk to me a little bit about everything that we've kind of been saying. Like, what is decentralized? Why is that so important?
Yeah. So the Bitcoin network is a decentralized open source protocol. So it's code that anybody can verify. There's no hidden back doors. It's all publicly available to check. And that's kind of like one of the beauties about it. There's no central entity, no country, company, or individual controls the network. The network is supported by market participants. So there's node runners. These are little computers where you just like download the Bitcoin protocol onto, and they verify any transactions sent to the network, comply with network rules. And there's their miners, which guess trillions of numbers. They have purpose-built computers that compile transactions into a block And this is called like the proof of work mechanism, which is inherent in very few cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin is by far the biggest cryptocurrency, and it's really the only one of note that still embraces this proof of work consensus mechanism. And the important thing about that is it ties Bitcoin to the real world. So we have a digital native money and this digital native currency, which is makes it, pioneer species that's never been done before. But it's still tied to the real world because you need physical resources, energy mainly, to power the computers that are solving the next block. And that's really an underrated thing about Bitcoin and what most of the other altcoins don't have. They have a consensus mechanism called proof of stake, where the largest holders of the currency get to validate transactions. And it's like, that's the same system we have right now. Why are you selling it to me different?
Where the biggest players get to basically have the most control.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it totally makes sense. Another thing that I think is really important is the limited supply.
Yep.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin that is programmed into the Bitcoin protocol. And the protocol can be changed, which is a good thing, but it takes a 51% consensus. So the node runners, so it's not the miners, people have, kind of this misconception because Bitcoin mining is like a big business. Like it's extremely capital intensive, right? It's described as like the most capitalistic industry in the world.
Wow.
Because nobody cares where you're getting your power from. You just need to get power as cheap as possible. That could be in the plains of Kazakhstan.
Yeah.
There's actually a lot of Bitcoin mining there.
Kazakhstan.
Yeah. The United States has the most Bitcoin
was that
mining.
Where Borat was from?
Yes.
Important.
Good shout out.
It's nice. Yeah. Very good.
Texas is actually like the capital of Bitcoin
in
mining.
The US?
Yeah. Or in the world.
In the world.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because they have cheap electricity.
Yeah.
So miners will be drawn to cheap electricity because that's ultimately like one of their base expenses, like the most prominent one. Obviously you have physical capex, like you have to essentially construct a data center. You have to pay people to man that. Like dirt gets in these machines, they overheat, they break, so you have to service them. But moral of the story, because there's only 21 million Bitcoin, it makes it the most scarce asset known to man. And it's digitally verifiable to be scarce. Gold is scarce, and it takes real world physical effort to pull it out of the ground. So there's like that real world component tied to it as well. But we don't know how much gold is in the ocean. We don't know how much, gold is, under whatever chunk of dirt. There could be people estimate there's gold and asteroids and stuff in space. But any individual around the world can verify there are 21 million Bitcoin.
Which is really awesome. Can you tell me a little bit more about kind of the rollout of it? This is a question I've always had. I don't know how much you know about like the history.
Yeah.
But how I've always wondered this. So Satoshi Nakamoto is the unknown founder, right? Is that a good way to describe it? Like he's known that it was him, but he's anonymous.
Yeah. Yeah. So the name Satoshi Nakamoto is a pseudonym. And that's what this individual has, identified themselves at. But the actual identity of the person has remained anonymous.
Right. And what was like how'd they get it out?
Yeah, it was literally just published to the internet.
And it just kind of caught wind and people just started to participate that way?
Yeah. Yeah. The Bitcoin is believed to have come out of the cypherpunk movement. So this really started kind of the late 80s, early 90s. This was really kind of at the beginning of cryptography and advanced mathematics with computers. And there had been some failed attempts at an internet native money. And there was this famous email list called the cypherpunk email list. And you can think of it as kind of like the biggest nerds on the internet.
Yeah.
Literally like just exchanging ideas on how cryptography works and how, these kind of concepts and key roadblocks could be solved to form internet native money. And it kind of fizzled out, but ultimately Satoshi, we do have records of him interacting with that email list, and so he was just hacking away alone on the side, and he published it online, and it was the Bitcoin white paper was released in January of 2009. At that point, it was published to the world. The first known person to interact with the Bitcoin network, his name, the late Halving. And, because Bitcoin's a public ledger, which is a good thing, unlike our current ledger right now, which is marred in, opaqueness, and, there's things like gray markets and swap facilities that make it hard for us as, market participants and money to actually know what's going on and what the value of our currency is. Bitcoin's a public ledger. And so you can verify, any, transaction on the blockchain for yourself. So we know that, Halfpenny interacted and received the first Bitcoin transaction. And from there, it was off and running. And it's actually, a very important point that the Bitcoin was released as a truly grassroots movement. A lot of other altcoins, they have a CEO, they have a marketing department, and this kind of gets into their tokenomics. Like there's things like a pre-mine. Ethereum had like a huge pre-mine, so it's like they released a protocol that was ultimately copied from Bitcoin, but when they released it, they kept X amount for themselves. And it's like, okay, Solana, almost literally all of these, and especially the meme coins too, which are is just straight degeneracy. But whoever found
Trump
it,
coin,
they literally keep anywhere from like 40 to 80% for themselves, and they release the other
to a point.
Yeah, exactly. No, there's a great graphic when that was all going down of like the tokenomics of that coin, and it's just so easy to identify a scam. And it's like, if you ask yourself, it's like, is this cryptocurrency a scam? It's like, is there a pre-mine? Yes, no, yes, scam. No. Bitcoin's like the only one to my knowledge that it wasn't pre-mined. So Satoshi mined coins himself.
Right. So that's how he got the early batch, because he is like 1 million, right?
Yeah, there is a million, which we believe to be his wallet, and that is believed to be his wallet because those coins have never moved.
Right.
So we don't know that for sure. And this is something I work with clients on too. It's like when you're dealing with the public ledger, there's ways to increase your, I would say, just increase like your hygiene when it comes to privacy. And everything's a series of trade-offs, right? So Bitcoin sacrificed some privacy for greater security, which ultimately I think was a good decision because there are things you can do as an individual to increase your privacy. And I'd rather start with a natively secure protocol as opposed to a natively private protocol.
So how hard is it? So if he were to anybody, like let's say you and I were sending each other money, like Bitcoin wallet, is that public for everyone to see always?
The network knows that transactions exist, but unless you were careless with your on-chain hygiene, there's no way to identify that wallet it's sent from was mine and the wallet you received was yours.
I see. Okay, that's super helpful. And so for you, let's bring it back to kind of personal finance for people.
Yeah.
One question I have is, do you think of Bitcoin as an investment vehicle or an investment strategy? And if so, how does that kind of work with the work that you do in traditional finance as well? Like, what is kind of, not that you have to get, the regulations and things, so I'm not trying to get you arrested.
Yeah.
But generally, what does that kind of look like, the approach that you kind of recommend for people? One, of how to view it. Like, what is this, what is this to them? Like, why should this matter to an individual Catholic? And what should they kind of do about that?
Yeah, no, it's
there's
great.
A lot there, so
totally,
that's not a short question.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's a good one. And just to quickly touch on the grassroots point too, because I really don't want to undersell how important this is. Because it was just like released to the internet. It's like obviously the people that were in the weeds of cryptography like knew about it, right? But it was after that, and that's why it's like very hard to replicate Bitcoin again, because in order to get like the word out for any protocol to this extent, like you would need some sort of central authority to literally get the word out. It's like Bitcoin didn't have that. They don't have it right now.
That's what I think is amazing.
It happened naturally.
Yeah.
Right. So, and it's just like the amount of capital that has been poured into like the mining infrastructure, the node infrastructure, like that all happened naturally. And it's like, if you even thought on how that would be recreated, like it'd be billions of dollars of just like marketing campaigns.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's like,
especially to have something, the phrase that always gets me is the adoption rate is faster than the internet.
yeah, which isn't that crazy?
Yeah, with no marketing, with no VCs backing it. Like the internet obviously had, investors that were pushing the popularity of it, or the adoption of it.
Exactly. And so, I really just, say that to really give credit to Satoshi for designing a beautiful system with free market incentives that really allowed, a true free internet digital money to take off naturally, as opposed to somebody trying to cramp down your throat. To your point about investments, so currency kind of evolved in 3 stages. So first, it's a store of value. Then it moves into a medium of exchange, and then ultimately a unit of account. So right now, we're still in the store of value aspect and life cycle of Bitcoin. It's about 16 years old now, so it's still a young and asset class, relative, especially compared to other, investable asset classes. The downside of that is that there's some volatility, natively or, naturally happening right now because it's still in price discovery mode. You can kind of think of it as like an adolescent teenager, finding its way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to, be okay with that. I ultimately think that's a, good thing. We're in price discovery mode. But what I really try hard to do at Basilic is integrate Bitcoin across my services. I do largely think of it as an investment right now, but I don't pigeonhole it into only being an investment. I invest, my dollars into Bitcoin, and I view that as an investment, for my family. I also spend Bitcoin, because I think that's important to grow
Getting
the
into
network.
that second stage.
Yeah, and adoption. So it takes both. How you view those things depends on how we build it into your financial strategy. What I really focus on the firm is sound custody solutions. So because it's a bearer asset and each individual has the ability to
BARE.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
The word bear has 2 meanings when it comes to Bitcoin.
Oh, bearer. It's actually ER at the end too. Bearer asset. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, we're only bulls here. I haven't seen a bear in a long time.
It's a bearer asset.
Yes.
Oh, gotcha.
So that really means you just have the ability as a sovereign individual to take custody of it. That's actually something pretty unique. You can take custody of gold. It's just like very cumbersome. Like gold is heavy. It's hard to move. Like there's a lot of security that comes, with that.
Right.
You technically can take custody of a stock. Nobody does that. It's actually kind of pointless to do so. But depending on each individual's clients, needs is different. But what's exciting is for me, specifically being in this unique space of bridging the gap between traditional financial services and Bitcoin financial services, is there's been a lot of build out in the, I would say, TradFi embracing Bitcoin. And so let's say, I'm working with a older client and building a portfolio for them. They might need some sort of fixed income exposure. That's, typically done through bonds because like we, kind of outlined earlier, you're getting paid interest. And so you're getting a stable rate of return, coming in. And, if you're retired, you might need that predictable income stream to live on. The unfortunate thing is most bonds, the largest market in the world is sovereign debt. That's debt issued by countries. As we touched on, that's melting away. So if I allow the US government to borrow money from me, I'm just going to get paid back with printed money. So I didn't actually get anywhere.
Right. Because the inflation, everything we talked about earlier.
Yeah. So what's like cool?
They're paying you 5%, but inflation's 8%.
Exactly. Yeah. You actually lost money on this trade.
Right.
So there's this company called Build Asset Management where they take Bitcoin collateralized loans, put that in a private credit fund, and then you are getting paid out on that yield from the interest on that loan. Mm-hmm. So it's a fixed income product, but the underlying asset is Bitcoin. Mm. So you're not getting debased, or you're at least getting exposure to, a sound money. So it's fun, and this is like the part about my job I like the most is, identifying ways, different people can benefit from Bitcoin. As, we move through the adoption curve of Bitcoin, and it continues to evolve into a medium of exchange and a unit of account. This is where I work with a lot of my financial planning clients, where I think, Bitcoiners are going to be the 1% of political and economic power. So, and this gets into the faith aspect of my business as well. It's like, how are we going to be good stewards of our wealth? Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I am actually not a fan of like this die with zero concept that's like very popular nowadays. We're just gonna, and obviously, I do think we should be, charitable and leave money to, whatever, cause you're passionate about, after you're gone. But I like it much better where we're just consistently raising good families that, back to the salesman, like believe in our core virtues and culture. And, we're consistently stewarding that wealth from generations to generations to take care of our local communities, take care of our parishes. And I think Bitcoin is going to be a phenomenal tool to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And this kind of gets back to the fixed supply as well. It's commonly referred to as a savings technology because it's deflationary. Like if you try to buy a house in Bitcoin in 2008, that house might have been worth 100,000 Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's worth 8 Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's like your purchasing power.
It's a nice house too for 8 Bitcoin.
Exactly. But your purchasing power is being preserved in a neutral monetary asset and a decentralized
or it's
network.
growing even.
Yes.
Yeah. The opposite, which is pretty amazing. Yeah. That's really awesome. With, say I'm an individual and I'm kind of interested in it now, like what's kind of the personal gains? I think that's a lot of the kind of societal gain. What do you think are kind of my personal gains from me buying Bitcoin? Like, why should I personally do it?
It is the best performing asset over the last 10 years. And as you know, it's like Bitcoin does move in cycles. And, that's actually kind of intentional.
And will you go into that some as well?
Yeah.
What a halving cycle is. I feel like most people don't know what that means.
Yeah. And so this is kind of, I think, where I really have, awe and great respect for Satoshi is just how beautifully designed the Bitcoin protocol is. And so initially when Bitcoin was released, Satoshi had to mine his coins, but at that point you could still mine Bitcoin on your average laptop because there wasn't a lot of competition for mining.
Interesting.
So it took a lot less compute power. And the halving cycles, or an epoch, was built in to Bitcoin to incentivize the build out of the mining network. So it initially started with your block subsidy for mining a block in the early days was 50 Bitcoin. And then every 4 years that gets cut in half. So it went from 50 to 25 and so on. Right now we're at 3.125 Bitcoin awarded for a block mine. And so that incentivizes the real world physical build out of the mining network. And that's programmed into the Bitcoin protocol. So it's about 2140, all Bitcoin will have been mined. But at that point,
the year 2140.
Yeah. At that point, we already have, billions of dollars poured into the mining network. So you can only imagine how large and built out it would have been at that point. And that makes the network very anti-fragile and resilient against attacks or any sort of nation state that you would want to try to come after it. It's like, again, genie's out of the bottle at that point. And so as part of that, there's also something called the adjustment difficulty. So as more compute comes online, it gets harder and harder to mine, the next block. And that's a fluctuating scale on a 2-week basis. So if a bunch of miners turn off, it's actually going to be a little easier to mine the block. If a bunch of miners come online, it becomes a little harder. So this is where we're just thinking about, think of truly free markets and, incentives. It's like it's all open and transparent, in Bitcoin.
Yeah. That's wild. Okay. So that's awesome. So going back to, you're talking about cycles and why an individual. So it's the best performing asset.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there's no 4-year cycle where Bitcoin has been down. Just if you look at it over time. And, when we were talking about earlier, if you want to live in a high trust Christian society and you go out and you work and dedicate all glory and honor to God, you will ultimately earn value, for your work. That's just how economies function. I think that's how they, should. And that's why, we were talking about earlier, it's like, what do we use money for anyway? It's an economic measuring stick. Money itself is not a production good. It measures the value already in existence. Well, if you're constantly getting debased by the Federal Reserve that keeps adding units, if you think of it just simply as a fraction where the money you own is a numerator, but the denominator keeps getting bigger, that means your numerator is worth less. So you could opt into a financial system that doesn't hate you and preserve that purchasing power, so you ultimately can do and deploy your capital in whatever means you seem necessary and fit for your particular cause, without getting stolen from. So I think it is a way to not only invest and ultimately trade your dollars for something more scarce and more valuable, but also something to preserve your purchasing power, because your time and capital can't be stolen from.
Yeah, which is obviously a huge benefit.
Yes,
a huge pro.
100%.
Now, a question that I've received from a lot of people. One thing is conversations I've had just over these last few weeks with people, just asking them like, I'll never forget this. This was a big moment for me at work. Bitcoin hit 100K, and I was like, Bitcoin just hit 100,000. I joined a team meeting with 9 people, and I was like, does that mean anything to anybody here? And they're all kind of like, no, I don't know anything about that. And what's cool about that is I think so many people, it's easy to think, oh, it's at $100,000. I haven't looked at it today. I don't know what it is today. 105,000 last time I looked. All-time high right now, I think about 109. People are like, we're so late. It's just natural to think that, wow, this thing used to be cents or dollars. When I first bought my first Bitcoin, it was $1,500, And so to think about that, it's 100x since then almost. It feels so late. And so you think, I remember talking to somebody about it a little bit more about oh, do you guys own any Bitcoin? Are you guys investing in Bitcoin? And it's no, I mean, we don't have 100 grand laying around. So talk to me a little bit about that. What is the way to get in, or kind of getting started? What's the minimum amount somebody needs to get started? And obviously, I think there's two sides to that. I don't want to spoiler alert the question, but there's kind of minimum amount, but then there's kind of mindset, I guess, for actually getting it. And I can kind of share my opinion on that too. Technically you can get in with actually next to nothing, but you probably want to start actually just kind of dollar cost averaging to some degree, and actually get in the game a little bit.
Yeah,
but
no, 100%. So there's a few qualities that make it good money. It's portable, it's easy to prove, it's accurate and genuine, it's durable, and then it's divisible. So you can split it into smaller units. Like one Bitcoin, I believe it's 10 decimal points. So it'd be 0.0901 is 1 Satoshi. And so Bitcoin is, you can split it into smaller denominations, right? And so you can buy $100 worth of Bitcoin. You can think of this as buying a fraction of a stock, right?
Yeah,
that's
if you're a goofball, you can buy $10 worth.
Exactly.
Yeah, let it go down to 8, then sell it. You know who you are out there.
Yeah, that guy's something else, man. He's become I was talking to Hapding about it. He's like our white whale, it's been some, it's
yeah.
But anyway, yeah, that's there's a saying in Bitcoin, it's get off zero. It's a process. It's one things I really encourage people to learn. It's a lot of times there's so many different rabbit holes in Bitcoin. Whether it's energy and grid maximization, kind of through more the mining lens. There's Austrian economics, through kind of more finance lens. And there's a lot to learn. And one of the things we don't want to do is get predicated or build an investment thesis on what other people think. We want conviction in our own actions. And so the strategic Bitcoin reserve has been in the news a lot. It's while I think that's exciting, that's not why I'm buying Bitcoin. It's I'm not buying Bitcoin because I think somebody else might buy it. I'm buying Bitcoin because I'm convicted in its long-term potential, and I think it's a sound money that is ultimately compatible with Catholic social teachings, as opposed to money which isn't. And so I generally encourage people to, like you said, dollar cost average and just build a position over time. And once you have skin in the game and you see it go up a little bit, you see it go down a little bit, you get comfortable with the movements, and then you just consistently build a position over time, you generally end up in a little better cost basis position, buying, when it's low, buying when it's high, and over time, that kind of evens out to tends to be, depending on the time frame and when you're buying and all those caveats, like a lower cost basis than the market price. So while you're doing that, not only helping yourself out from an economic perspective, but you're also gaining conviction in that position.
Right. Yeah, I think you just laid that out so beautifully, because that was exactly my journey, and for me, my personal opinion on it, or my personal approach to it has been, I bought my first, 2017, 2018, when I first learned about it, and did not go as deep as I should have, obviously, because I'd be much richer than I am right now if I had. But even just then, just kind of like dabbling in it, which is kind of what I recommend. I'm like, exactly, get some skin in the game. You start to build conviction, especially after you witness a full 4-year cycle. I think you see the volatility, you see all the people in the news that'll start to say, oh, this is never coming back, like this is gone forever. I remember that in 2018, 2019, and then I remember 2020, and having some still in and being somewhat involved, and then going more in, and then seeing the hype and the build and kind of resurge in the halving of 2020, and then into like the market top of the cycle top, I should say, in 2021, and then it kind of crashing back down, and people saying, oh, like this is terrible. Then FTX gets, blown up, and was that Sam Bankman-Fried? The whole sentiment, terrible opinions, the news, doomsday, all this stuff. And then, now the ETF gets approved. Now the government has like approved for people to, basically invest in Bitcoin through Wall Street. Pretty big deal. Nations start turning towards it and start accumulating in El Salvador and all these different things that are happening. And so just kind of staying aware of it is really important, and just kind of seeing all that. For me, it was 2018 to 2021. That was kind of my conviction building time. And then that's when I said, okay, we're going to get serious about this. We're going to be investing in this. Like, this is something that's going to be a big part of our family's future. Now, for me, just to kind of settle the concerns for people out there, it takes time to get to the place where you are, which is just a maximalist. I have friends other than you. I have friends. You're going to have friends that are on all sides, right? Friends who are super anti anything crypto, anything Bitcoin. You have friends that are 100% into real estate, 100% into stocks. And I have many people in the Catholic world that are 100% into nothing, which is, to me, by far the worst place you can be. It's just like, I just don't invest in anything. I don't try to increase my income, whatever. Just like, money doesn't matter. I'm not thinking about myself. I'm not thinking about my family. I'm not thinking about the other people I could help. It goes back to everything we talked about before of like, we're called to be successful because we live in America. We could. You could have a lot of money in Bitcoin by investing a little bit of money in Bitcoin if you just took time to learn about it and care and just put some money aside into it, right? That's a big thing. That matters. I think that's a moral decision to just say, I'm going to ignore this and not listen to this and not care to learn about it. That's one approach. That's the worst approach. For the other things, what I recommend when I've had people, family members and friends I've had conversations like this about recently of like, I don't know much about investing. Where do I start? I give them a book on real estate investing, a book on stock market investing. I don't have a good Bitcoin book, so I got to come to, but I have like YouTube channels and things like that. And I'm doing this podcast with you for this very reason. My approach is I still love all three of those kind of big baskets of investing, right? I still really love stock market investing. Like, I still invest in my 401k. I still have an IRA. I love real estate investing. We Airbnb in our house. I hope to buy, multiple properties when we get into Kansas City. But then we have a pretty heavy holding in Bitcoin. Obviously, also some, what people might call shit coins. I don't invest in meme coins, but I do own some altcoins. I've vowed to my dear friend Wyatt here that this will be my last year of altcoin investing in 2025.
Thank you.
Kind of like I'm like your crackhead friend that's just like, dude, just like, let me just party it up this year, and then I'll be done. Right. But I don't do Trump coin or Dogecoin or Hawk Tuah coin. Like, I stay away from those things. I do kind of the top ones, but I still recognize and appreciate your objections to those. But that's still a big thing for us. So what I try to tell people is, I understand if you don't want to get into it all in. because I'm not all in on it either. I don't understand not wanting to be in on it at all. That is kind of, to me, again, the worst place is to be totally out of everything. To me, the next worst place is to be only in one of the three, is also just as, to me, as daunting, right? But especially to be in only one of the three that just continuously goes up and down. Like, the stock market is manipulated, everything we talked about with the financial system, by so many different people, so many different actors. So many restrictions on that. You can't touch it till you're 65 or you pay a penalty. There's so much stupidity to that, right? Which is one of the things that really opened up real estate to me. It was like, real estate investing is all these tax savings and things that can actually save you money now, make you money now, long-term wealth building. Love that. And then to me, it was like, when I started to understand Bitcoin, it's like, this is like all of that, the best of both of those things combined into one. So how do I not have a large position in this as well? And it's the same thing that we have, like, we invested in a startup last year, or I have, equity in different things that we've worked in. And that's kind of my approach, is to try to say, okay, one, we need to be intentional and we need to actually have a plan. And to have a plan and make a decision, I have to make an informed decision and know what the different options are. Two, once I have a plan, I want to try to have multiple options to get me to success, multiple paths to success. Where I tell Emily, I'm like, if all of these things that we are in, if they hit or like continue to do what I think they'll do, like, we'll have a lot of money. If only one of the 3 or 4 hit, I'm like, we'll still be pretty good, And if none of them hit, like, I think that we're still at least invested enough in my 401k just to match the company that, like, we'll be able to retire. You know what I mean? But I'm like, that to me is like how you start to create a financial plan, which sounds like what you do, especially with clients, is helping them to understand, where are you at with these different things? What are you most comfortable with? What are you most bullish on? And, like, let's try to create that plan. But I think it's good for people to be challenged and pushed a little bit with, maybe you're not as comfortable with one of these as you should be, and you should be putting some into this. But I think back to, I actually had, this is kind of funny thinking about this because I kind of forgot about it, but I recorded with Paul J. Kim, a prominent Catholic speaker, it literally in like 2021. And that was the first, he went off this whole rant because he had just started this kind of like Catholic, like budgeting kind of personal finance course or something that he was launching. And he went on this rant about Bitcoin. And I'll never forget the only time I met him was at a friend's bachelor party down in Austin. And he was going off about it. And he was actually huge for me because I told you, this is 3 years into my journey already. Yeah. But he was like all over it, like all about it. Super, super hype about Bitcoin. And I was like, wow, that was really interesting to hear a Catholic person, especially somebody who's like so deep. I mean, like masters in theology, all this stuff. And he's laying it out. And he was like, we're not investing in stocks anymore. He was the first person I ever met that was like just a maximalist, like, this is it. And I'm like, man, if all of you out there who were listening to the Seeking Excellence 4 years ago would have just put $500 in, $2,000 in, even at the top, where you'll be a year from now, or 9 months from now, or 5 years from now, is going to be insane compared to any other asset that you could have put $500 in, or $1,000 in, or $10,000 in. And so all that to say, it's just a rant of kind of just my view of it, of just like, even if you're not somebody, you and I disagree on whether or not you should buy a house, that's okay. Because I think that we at least both understand and believe that, like, this is really important, and that this is a good alternative, that the financial system sucks, that people are trying to screw us, and that we need to take ownership and own things that are going to appreciate over time, and that are going to increase our purchasing power, increase our family's wealth, increase the impact that we can make in the world. And I do agree that I think there's a large chance that Bitcoin is like you said, the top 1% of influential people, powerful people in the world. And we want to obviously be in that community if that's true, both for like the finance and the power that will come with it, because we want to have positive influence, but also to continue to convert the souls that are in there if they're going to be leaders in the country and in the world. And so you don't have to go, all that to say, you don't have to go all in on it and feel like these guys, this is a really compelling argument. I don't feel like I'm comfortable to go stop investing in my 401k and just go all in on this. Nobody's saying you have to do that, but you can still buy a house. You can still invest in your IRA, and you can invest in Bitcoin, but you get to decide. What I always tell people in personal finance and budgeting is we try to operate on the 10% tithe, 15% for investing, and then 25 to 30% for housing expenses. I really like the percentages. I think it breaks things down nice and easy. And that 15% can be broken down for me, let's say in those three categories, where I'm investing in real estate, I'm investing in the stock market, and I'm investing 5% in Bitcoin. If you invest 5% of your income in Bitcoin, 12 years from now, you're going to be a really happy boy.
That's right. That's right. At least that's the hope.
Yes, exactly. At least that's the hope. That's exactly right. So one question that I definitely wanted to ask you, we can kind of close the last couple questions here, is I think a big pushback for a lot of people, and I know my rebuttal to this, and so I do not obviously hold this position. But something a lot of people say is what was the name of the guy that just got freed?
Ross Ulbricht.
Ross Ulbricht was imprisoned for, that's okay. Maybe we'll just do the audio for the last little bit. Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right. Ross Ulbricht was just freed for. Actually, let me just put a mark here. If I just do this mark, I'll come back to where that was. 2 hours. I think we just hit the record for SE podcast, which is exciting.
No kidding.
Yeah, I think 2 hours was the max I've ever done. We're at 2:11.
Let's go.
Huge. Maybe I'll just plug it.
Yeah, right.
Ross Ulbricht just got freed, pardoned by President Trump after 11 years, I think, in prison. And he ran a dark web website called
Silk
Road, where people could buy drugs. I'm told maybe not Silk Road, but other things were like human trafficking, prostitution, all kinds of illegal activity and things like that. That was one of the first objections that I heard was I think it had such a bad rep because of the fact that it was used for, these nefarious, like illegal things. And it was like the anonymity behind it was something that allowed it to flourish and allowed crime and things like that to flourish. Obviously that's a huge problem for a Catholic to think about. Like, we just talked about all the positive things of participating in it. How do you kind of view that, the dark side of it and what that means for us as Catholics?
Yeah. I think we need to be honest with ourselves. We have a neutral monetary asset on a decentralized network. Like, anybody can use it. Terrorists drink water too. So I understand. And I mean, I commonly go back to, so how much crime is facilitated with the US dollar?
Yeah, that's always my rebuttal to it. Cash is the exact same way. I mean, you watch any movie you watch that involves crime, they just exchange cash.
Yeah. $100 bills.
Yeah, it's untraceable. I mean, it's traceable, I guess, if you're like, when police officers and things are like going after people, but it, like white collar crime when they're trying to like trace dollars and things like that. But generally, it's untraceable, and you're just, human trafficking flourishes far before Bitcoin existed. Slave trades, like you name it, right? There was like sinful things happening with money.
Exactly.
Before Bitcoin.
Yeah. And, I kind of look at, what are the, evil things that are happening, now? Because obviously, it's like crime can be facilitated in Bitcoin. And unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about that. What I'm optimistic about in Bitcoin is because it's truth and it's verifiable truth. We kind of have a restructuring of the social layer built on top of it. And right now, it's like, whether it's the NSA or FinCEN, we have so much of our privacy invaded to try to prevent crime, where it's like innocent people end up getting spied on and, their privacies and freedoms infringe upon. And I think that just creates like this really negative, cascading cycle where it's like you're kind of guilty until proven innocent. Mm-hmm. And it's supposed to be the exact opposite. And so what I'm hopeful, and this is kind of getting like a little bit more esoteric, sense of Bitcoin, but if we're not constantly getting debased and we can make informed economic decisions for ourselves because we know the base market is money is true and there's accurate market signals coming in, that's going to ultimately lead to greater human flourishing. Understanding bad things will still happen, but that kind of goes back to I don't expect the money to fix that. I expect a high trust Christian society to fix that. And we need to hold each other accountable of not just being degenerate beings that devolve into evil and temptation.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Yeah, terrorists drink water too. Which also, I mean, honestly, there's a part of scripture where in the Gospels Jesus talks about how your Father in heaven sends the sunshine on the righteous and the unrighteous, and he sends rain on the good and the bad as well, right? That in a certain sense in this life, one of the most difficult aspects, I think, one of the most difficult things about being a Christian is seeing that evil people also have good things happen to them, and they have bad things happen to good people, right? That those things just happen in both ways to people in this life, and it's a harsh reality, but it's what we have. And I think that's similar to like Bitcoin, if you view it as this blessing, which I know that you do, and I really believe that it ultimately can be a really good thing. Both good people and bad people will take advantage of that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think that you're going to have that. First, yeah, would just love to close with just you kind of tell us a little bit more about Basilic. Any other things that you obviously want to share, wrapping up kind of our conversation or closing arguments for Bitcoin, but would also love to just hear more about where people can find you, first of all, and the services that you provide and how you help people.
Totally. No, super appreciative for this opportunity, Nathan. It's been a blast.
Super fun.
You can find me at basilic.io or wyattorourke.com, where I have some more of my work, or WR O'Rourke on Twitter. Most active there on social media. And at Basilic, we offer 4 services: retirement services, like 401k plans for small businesses, wealth management, portfolio construction, financial planning, and Bitcoin financial services. Try really hard to not be your father's financial advisor, and we take a human first approach. So we first identify your goals and what's truly important to you, and then we try to solve for that, as opposed to optimizing for a number on a spreadsheet. And ultimately, like I said earlier, we really try to find funded contentment where money and meaning are in balance. This isn't the worship of money is evil, so that's what we try to avoid. But we try to use our resources and be good stewards for the world we want to live in. And I really would like to just end here on explaining and hammering home the point that fiat money is incompatible with Catholic social teachings and moral teachings. The dollar has been weaponized. It enables theft through inflation. It undermines honesty and fairness. There's a high time preference, which incentivizes degenerate behavior. And it's the absolute power over money that leads to the worship of man, which we all know are really bad things. And I really do want to hammer home this point too, that when the base market is, money is manipulated, every other market on top of it is also manipulated. I just think that is pure evil. And when market signals are so badly distorted, individuals are stripped of their ability to make informed economic decisions, undermining their God-given free will and sovereign agency. And you are then forced into degenerate behavior and gambling with your capital, because there's no clear market signals. And that loss of clarity breeds despair, that leads to disorientation and disrupts or enables a cycle of suffering that disrupts our natural human order based on. And I think Bitcoin is the exact opposite of that. It's actually compatible with Catholic teachings because it restores individual agency and sovereignty. It enshrines trust and honesty. It promotes economic justice, and it's freedom money. I think there are 2 things in this world that are true. It's a Catholic Church and it's Bitcoin. And the church has been persecuted in the past. It will be persecuted again in the future. I think we have this unique gift and ability to opt out of a system run by people who hate us and build upon a system that will usher in the next 2,000 years of the church.
I love it. That's a great place to close. Thank you so much, man. Thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you everybody for listening. I hope that today was very eye-opening and informative, and hopefully inspiring for people to learn more and to go deeper. They can reach out to either one of us, the places that you mentioned that they can reach out to you. And then people already know how to reach out to me, whether that be on LinkedIn, Instagram, on Locals. And we'd be more than happy to share with you some of our favorite resources, books, podcasts, things like that, that we can go into. I actually might even ask you to make a list that I'll post on Locals of resources for people. Definitely. That's a good idea, of books and podcasts, YouTube channels, all that kind of stuff. And we'll obviously be posting all your links and things as well, for people to find you and hopefully work with you to help them to get out of that fourth category of no intention, no plan in their finances. So, or whatever category they're in, but especially if they're that one,
Yes,
they definitely need to reach out. Awesome, man. Well, God bless you, everyone, for listening. Thank you so much. If you found this helpful, if you have friends who either bash Bitcoin or ask questions about it or are curious about it, or you know nothing about it, please send them this episode. It would mean a lot to us. It would mean a lot to them in the long run for sure as well. So thank you for listening. It is now time for you to go out there and be your best. We'll see you next time.
What a banger.
We did it, Joe.